Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for April 9th, 2018. We'll begin with the special order calendar, decision items, 26006BZ, 112 Charlton Street, Manhattan.
It's very elegant, Charlton.
Is it Charlton?
It's Charlton.
Charlton, sorry. I'm a Brooklyn girl, what can I tell you?
A decision on this item has been deferred since January to allow the PCE time to correct its sprinkler installation. According to the owner, the sprinkler work has been done, but the sprinkler company is unwilling to sign an affidavit to that effect. So, and I understand the fear by many of overly legal-looking documents, the fear of signing such things. There's an invoice that was provided that states that after the modifications that were made, the system was restored to service. And the owner, in this case, because it's a really small operation, is requesting that that be sufficient proof of compliance with the board's terms. I think that's reasonable. We know the work was done. And it's on fire department's radar. And so
We're okay with that?
I think that should be all right.
Okay. Continued hearing items. Item number 2, 214-000BZ, 2761 Plum, 2nd Street, Brooklyn.
We last had a hearing on this a year ago, as it turns out, and it's been adjourned 3 times since. The applicant has been working with DOB on plan review and to obtain approval to locate parking off-site across the street. There was apparently another meeting that happened since the submission with the plans examiner. So the applicant should tell us about what that is. Plans were submitted on March 22nd and were then revised on March 23rd. And the revision includes now 96 required parking spaces, 20 of which are, again, after a long discussion about this, located in the 30-foot waterfront open area. I keep thinking that I'm like missing a beat here. We talked a lot about this open area before and that there isn't allowed to be parking in it. If that's not the case, then the applicant needs to explain to us that an open area along the waterfront is allowed to be used for parking.
I brought this to their attention, and I'm under the belief that they believe it does comply, and they can explain it.
Okay, good.
I had a conversation last week.
It's in the email that they sent.
Yeah, I believe so.
So it is that it's allowed?
That they believe that they're in compliance, and they submitted that along with the reconsideration for allowing the maneuverability within the map street between the 2 parking lots.
Okay.
I think the argument is that this is not a waterfront lot, since it doesn't coincide with the seaward of the shoreline.
Right. But it hasn't, they've been saying it's not a waterfront lot since the initial application. It's on the old drawings. So, yeah, so anyway, that's for them to have determined by DOB. So they're arguing now that we had concerns about the maneuverability and had asked for a diagram or an operational plan, and they never gave us one unless I missed something.
They just sent in the recon with the plans that show that the bed of the map street between the 2 lots, which is I think Plum 3rd, is going to be their maneuverability space, and it was okayed by the Brooklyn DOB commissioner.
Okay. We had talked about at the several hearings about the concern I had that pedestrians, because there's no sidewalk here, that pedestrians are being forced to walk in the street. And they showed us photographs of striping and of this sort of, striped area that's clearly a pedestrian walk, but I don't think it's shown on the plans. I think that pedestrian walk is happening in the sidewalk, but I can't tell because they didn't key the photograph to the plans, because there's another pedestrian area that's striped on the plans that's just a way to walk around the cars, so the cars don't park there. But this is about walking around the street, and that was the part I was concerned about. So at the same time, so that street is privately owned, though we don't know by whom, because it doesn't show up on ACRIS when you try to figure it out. So it's not as if it's DOT domain to manage the striping, it doesn't sound like. And then they're required by DOB to provide a parking restricted declaration, and we should get a copy of that. And that's for the lot across the street. Anything?
I had a question, and that is with regards to the fact that though it is not a waterfront lot, it is a waterfront block. And as I look at the zoning regulations section 62655, there would be some screening that would be required, and if they could clarify it. And this is for, though it says public garage screening, and this is an open, and it says open parking areas on a zoning lot fronting on an upland connection or street on any waterfront block shall require screening pursuant to section 37921. So I'm not sure if they're meeting that, and I would like clarification of if that is required and how that would be addressed.
Pursuant to 37 what?
921, that is perimeter landscape. And screening is required pursuant to section 62452.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Any others? Okay.
Item number 3, 35-10BZ, 144-11 77th Avenue, Queens.
This is a really problematic application. There is still a full vacate and stop work order on this site, and tens of thousands in ECB violations still owed according to the BIS website. The cover letter we were provided with indicates that the owner is basically intending to just wait out the fines until they are written off in 2019. The building was converted to this use from a house to a synagogue without permits, so the board variance was essentially a legalization of illegal work. There's a huge history with this owner of abuse of the law and of the enforcement processes that are there to protect the public. This case has been in hearings for 3 years, and there's been effectively no progress. I see that the sprinkler and alarm drawings were just self-certified this month and last, and that a sprinkler permit has been open for a year, and there's no alarm permit. So I get the impression that whenever they come to a hearing, they scramble and they do a little bit to make us keep this open. The owner is complaining about all the fees and fines and costs associated with the project, but I have to say they're all self-inflicted. If this had been built in the usual way pursuant to permits, they wouldn't be facing all of these fines and costs, that sort of duplicative costs, because they did work on the building illegally, and now they have to go back into the building and do work because all that illegal work needs to be ripped out and redone. So, there was another set of plans that were submitted that looks like the submission in January, and it was submitted without explanation. The cover letter seems to be arguing that the new submission demonstrate that the amendments that they made substantially, that they made without board approval, substantially comply with the original approval, but there's actually nothing on those drawings that demonstrate that. So we've talked about this before, where we had to compare one drawing to the new drawings to the old drawings ourselves. So I actually don't know why they submitted this new set of drawings. The request is for an extension of time to obtain a C of O. The building is vacant and padlocked. We have never gotten a work schedule from them, and there's a comment from the contractor, who I looked up, who's a very, very small-time contractor, which indicates that this project could go on for years and years because of absence of financing. So I'm super frustrated by this. I'd like to hear others' ideas about how to handle what I consider to be a really unfortunate, if this were only up to me, I'd say no to the extension of time to complete. But I'd like to hear from others.
I think they're making progress, even though it may not be to the desirable extent that we would want. And granting an extension to the permit, I'm not sure what it gets us in return. So
out of our enforcement. You know, we're turned into the enforcement agency. That's not what we are, right? So by us seeing this for years and years and years, it's just that they're forced to come here all the time and do a little to show us that they're like trailing along. And there's a time when DOB just needs to step in and take care of it, kind of thing. That's why. It's just so frustrating because we're getting very little where, you know.
They haven't abandoned the project.
Right, they haven't, that's
So
true.
therefore, I don't know why we would not extend them the 4 years.
So then the question is, what we were doing up until now was having them install the sprinklers and the safety systems. So we could just say, okay, we don't want to deal with this anymore here, and just get it out, right? That's another way of doing it. And if they don't do the work or, you know, and we look at it.
I know it's unfortunate, but we have cases that unfortunately, because of lack of funding and probably not having top flight architects, attorneys, engineers do languish before they get built. This is not the only case.
Right.
So.
I believe the contractor letter they submitted, they are talking about the contractor letter that they
Yeah.
submitted. It's saying that they need 1.5 years to complete.
He said, but that depends on their ability to pay. And because we've been doing this since 2015, it sounds like they don't really have an ability to pay. Part of this is that DOB will not issue a permit to them until they pay the Environmental Control Board fines. They don't want to pay the fines, so they're waiting out the write-off period, which is 10 years. So we're not going to see any work here, probably, till the beginning of till the middle of 2019, because that's when the fines get written off. That's the reality.
I'm assuming until the work is complete, the building cannot be occupied.
That's actually a fire department. It was fire department that ordered the vacate.
I mean, if you want to encourage them to get the work done and complete as much, so that the building is occupiable, otherwise it's a building that's sitting there without any use, maybe you can require that no CFO or TCO be granted until the work is completed.
Well, they can't be. You can't get a TCO until
The
it's
sprinklers
fire
in.
safe.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the nature of a TCO. But that doesn't have anything to do with occupancy. You know how many buildings are occupied with never having had a TCO? I mean, the number in New York is staggering. So the way it always works is the owner finishes up enough, but it's not enough to get a sign-off from DOB, and they move in. And the only reason that they get vacated is if something happens, unfortunately, and then DOB and fire department come in and vacate. It's extremely rare that an occupied building without a CFO is vacated. In this case, it was because they converted a house to a synagogue. And a house doesn't have adequate structure, it didn't have the fire safety systems. There's actually a door that opens on the side where you drop to your death. I mean, there's like...
I think given that we now have a representative from FDNY attending these hearings and it's
Yeah.
on their radar, we can be a little bit more comfortable in knowing that such occupancy shall not happen.
Yeah.
It will not happen.
Well, so fire department does as much as it can do, but it's not the only agency that's involved in this, so. Okay.
Move on? Mm-hmm. New cases, item number 4, 17047BZ, 1982 Crotona Parkway, the Bronx.
So we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. Fire department provided us a letter on March 30th that signs off on the fuel storage permits, and I didn't have any issues.
No.
Yeah. Item number 5, 15413BZ, 1054, 1064 Bergen Avenue, Brooklyn.
There's no notice of hearing requirements for extensions of time to complete, and I didn't have any issues.
Yeah.
Item number 6, 29213BZ, 2085 Ocean Parkway, Brooklyn.
Likewise, there's no hearing notice requirement for extensions of time to complete construction. So this one, because I was reviewing from a little thumb drive and I couldn't access into the online database for this, the only thing I was able to review was the letter of substantial compliance request, which obviously isn't something that we look at before the board. But I note that there is a letter of substantial compliance request that's in process right now, and the last submission on it was actually just April 3rd, and there are certain modifications that they're requesting in that letter that may rise to the level of a minor modification. So if they want to if they want to continue to pursue those modifications, they may end up coming to us. So I would say we need to sort of bundle this and not move ahead, because if we grant the extension of time, then they're going to have to come back again in case the letter can't be issued, right? Because they're arguing in their letter that those modifications actually are substantially similar to what was granted, and then once it gets into a debate about that, that sounds like something that should come to a hearing. So so what I would just say is we should discuss that generally, but they haven't applied for an amendment, so they can modify this to apply for an amendment. I think that would be the cleanest.
Which an amendment would have would have a hearing notice requirement.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Or if they change what they're proposing in the letter.
Right.
Be a letter.
Correct. Yeah, that's the
Then
thing.
we can move forward on that.
Exactly.
Sure.
So either, right.
Got it.
Move on.
Yeah.
Appeals calendar, continued hearing items. Item number 7, 2017-103A, 3924 Victory Boulevard, Staten Island.
Okay, the Homeowners Association amendment cover letter states that it is amended to reflect 3 houses instead of 5, which is what we asked them to do, but they didn't actually amend the document. I'm not really sure how the AG's office works, but it would seem to me that you need to actually have an amendment of the document so that all are on notice that it's been amended, as opposed to a cover letter that says, consider it 3 houses, as opposed to, am I talking about the wrong one?
No,
that's
Okay.
I'm just looking at.
She's just scrunching her face like,
I'm trying to
what are
see-
you talking about? Okay. So anyway, so that one, that's confusing to me, and it's true, I'm no expert on what an AG amendment looks like. The same HOA document refers to both lot owners as it binds both lot owners. So the both lot owners are actually the developer. So this is not an agreement that binds future owners. It's an agreement that it's an announcement to the Attorney General that there is this subdivision and sale in process, and these are the obligations of the developer, right? So, and I'm just going to reread the comments we had at the last hearing, that the HOA and easement decks have to be amended to reflect 3 homes instead of 5. There's currently an easement deck in favor of the fire department, which I think is our standard easement, but I'd like the fire department to review it to be sure they have what they want to see. It grants the fire department the right to enter and to enforce the no parking restrictions on this site, because the road would be extremely narrow if there was parking on it. My comments were, I didn't find a maintenance obligation imposed on the HOA or individual homeowners, or acknowledgement that they are obligated to install and maintain sewers and roadways and signage, or that the fire department can enforce against them for parking in the roadbed. I'm also not sure that I found a cross easement for access by each property owner onto the other's land, because if you're parking your car, even if you're it's the house facing Victory, you park the car on somebody else's land. So, you need to drive along somebody else's land to get there and to park the car there. So there needs to be a cross easement. I didn't find that anywhere. And if it's in those documents, they should show us, because it's 100 pages of AG filings and it's not our job to find it. So what was submitted to us was the comments on costs for maintenance, which is what the AG's office requires be disclosed so that future comers know that they have certain financial obligations, but it doesn't bind the future comers. That's the point. It's like, it doesn't, it's not assigned to heirs and assigns and so on, that obligation. So, and there's also no obligation to maintain or with rights of passage that are in that section. So, and I don't think it's there. I thumbed through it. I was looking, and again, it's the obligation of the applicant to show us where it is if it's there. I think the simplest thing to do is for them to prepare a restrictive declaration with maintenance and no parking obligations that's separate, will be recorded separately against the property. That makes it super easy for any property purchaser to find. And you know, the comment that your lawyer will tell you what's in the HOA, no, they won't. I mean, really. So, and then also an easement that shows a clear right of easement in favor of each property owner. Okay. So, and anybody else on this one? We keep going back through this again and again, but I do think the restrictive declarations and easement will make it the cleanest. Okay.
Item number 8, 2017-218A, 35 House Street, Brooklyn. Staten Island.
The applicant submitted DOT-approved builder's pavement drawings for 23, 27, and 31 House Street, which is adjacent to the subject property and fronts on House Street that's 50 feet wide. I'm not really sure how relevant that is to DOT's objection to this application, as this house sits within the bed of North Berger Avenue, and that is the roadbed that they indicate they may in future want to open. I also don't see how the builder's pavement plan for the YMCA site, which is across North Berger, indicates a waiver on the right to open Berger. That site was not developed in the bed of Berger, nor did it propose to access the site from Berger. It accesses it from the other side. And as instructed previously, if the applicant wants to argue about this, they should do it with the DOT. With respect to the sewer corridor we're with, and whether or not it should be the width that the DEP wants or BSA's ability to override that, BSA has no one on staff who can review the needs of sewer system. So it relies on DEP to determine that, so we are not getting involved in that.
I'm sorry, DEP is reviewing that?
DEP
is reviewing the sewer corridor. They had a meeting that what the applicant has done is that they submitted a letter, and so they're offering 28 feet. So DEP is, I spoke to DEP last week, the project manager, Paulina Belter. They're reviewing that.
Okay.
Now, I also spoke to Tika Garung the other day last week about the DOT, and it seemed like they were looking at this, revisiting this issue of not opening the street, but if there's if they're putting that easement there for DEP, that might be something that may work with them, but they're looking at that.
Okay.
They didn't tell me what time frame, but they are looking at it.
Okay. Because, you know,
I'm sorry. When you said they are offering 28 feet, you mean the applicant, not the DEP?
Yeah.
The applicants,
Okay.
I'm sorry, yes. The
Just I wanted to make it
DEP asked for 35, the applicant had a meeting, but they're offering 28. They're looking at that.
Okay,
They're
they
reviewing
haven't
that.
accepted that yet?
No,
the
they're
DEP.
reviewing that.
Okay.
And DOT is revisiting their issue about North Berger.
Right, right. And, you know, when you look at the aerial map of North Berger, it comes down from the north and up from the south, and there's only 2 blocks where it doesn't exist. And the if you look at where the developments are, there are no houses that sit in the bed. If there was a house in the bed, then you'd say, what are you going to do, make them really tear down their house? But you're just traveling through lawns. So I really do understand their concern about wanting to link this. And you look at the borough president map of a clear grid system that was laid out in that area. And I found out something else, actually. The applicant claimed that, his client is being deprived of the right to develop his property, but actually, this property was subdivided last year. It was a much larger lot 11, and those 3 houses that are adjacent, lot 23, 27, and 31 Howe, sit on lot 11 that was subdivided. And this is the 4th of that subdivision, so I don't know where this property owner fits in that chain of sale, but it may have been, in fact, the developer who did that subdivision and is trying to build one more house, right?
And just to add to that, those subdivisions, lot sizes are much bigger than the requirement, so if they were modified, it is possible that this lot could have had a little bit bigger lot area that would have allowed for it to locate the building in a way to minimize its encroachment onto Berger also. And one of those, like you were saying, there are 2-3 blocks that are where Berger is not existing. And there are portions of that Berger that is owned by city. So just to, yeah, there are 1 or 2 lots that are owned by city.
Okay.
So just to keep that in mind, I'm very torn on this one, and I want to really understand fully where DEP and DOT stands on this. If they're okay with this,
That's a different thing.
that's a different thing.
Yeah, this is the only one that I'm aware of where DOT's, that so far since I've been doing this, that
they
where
have
DOT
weighed
said
in on
no.
it. Yeah.
All the other times, they're like, okay, you proceed at your risk, but we don't have any plans.
Actually, I stand corrected. There's 1 lot. It's a pretty big
One
size
lot, okay.
that is city-owned.
Did you also see the neighbor complain about it's a, what do you call it, I'm sorry, it's a wall, they put up a retaining wall to level off the lots, so the neighbor is complaining.
About
the ugliness
drainage?
of it, and, well, he said that he was a little concerned that he was not notified, and I said, well, I explained to him in the GCLs that we don't do notification, that's something we're looking at. So he said the only reason when he knew that they were building on this was that they were digging in the manholes, they were digging in the street for the sewer lines, and they told him they were capping off the sewer lines. And then they also put down this retaining wall that sort of faces that's sort of in the back of his property, so it sort of then kills his sight line, and, took down the plants and all these other things. So he had submitted a photograph and a letter.
So that's not our domain.
Yeah. He said this 6-foot wall is his view now, and he was very unhappy, just concerned.
Well, all of them, a good reason why all of our cases should be noticed, and especially these GCLs that are very controversial. So, okay.
New cases, item number 9, 2017-68A through 2017-96A. It's 7 to 49 Taurus Loop and 11 to 16 Frozen Lane, Staten Island.
Okay. Just for a little bit of trivial pursuit, Taurus, and Frosinone are provinces in southern Italy, right near the boot. Just to let you know where they get those names from, right? New streets. So we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board 3 recommends approval with 18 in favor and 9 opposed, on condition that on-street parking is provided and opposing tandem parking. That condition's problematic because the fire department states in their letter that no parking is permitted because the roadway is only 34 feet wide. So I doubt the community board was aware that this was going to be an issue. The BSA has been confronting over the last few years the reality of the impact that the GCL waivers have had on Staten Island communities and its infrastructure. By bypassing the City Planning Commission's mapping action process, neighborhoods have been created without adequately planned roadways, drainage systems, fire safety, long-term maintenance, and without coordination with the many agencies that oversee the development of neighborhoods. This application is to create a new neighborhood of 35 densely planned new homes, only 6 of which having frontage on a mapped street, and all 35 of which accessing their individual tax lots from 34-foot wide unmapped streets. The topographical map shows this development site sloping rather steeply toward Richmond Valley Road. The board has no expertise in siting and drainage analyses to review whether this is an appropriate plan, density, or otherwise for this site. A CPC mapping action includes review of detailed plans by many different agencies. They work together in a kind of a conference where they all sit around a table and they talk about the impacts that a large development is going to have in the community and how to work that out. This site only received in 2014 a CPC subdivision, school capacity, and topography modification tree removal approval, and we were provided with nothing to indicate that CPC reviewed the same questions as it reviews for a mapping action. So, and we have a copy of the mapping action requirements and so on, and they are very, very extensive. So all of the approvals that we were provided are old, and some have expired, like the school capacity has expired, and there's no sign that the applicant has made efforts to review. There's also no HOA, homeowners association in place, only a promise to create one. The 2013 Builder's Pavement Plan provided with the application shows only the treatment of Richmond Road, not the proposed unmapped streets. And this is because, of course, the DOT has no jurisdiction over an unmapped street, nor does DEP or fire department. So that's the point. This is a request to access a new development of 35 houses by roads that will not be subject to protection by New York City infrastructure agencies. So I actually think, and we've been talking about this a lot, that this is too large of a development to be considered for a GCL waiver. And by the way, what could possibly be the practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship to prevent the developer in this case from going to city planning for a mapping action? That's actually a finding in the GCL statute. And when we look at much smaller developments, you know, arguably it's because going through a mapping action is really onerous and it takes a long time. And so when you have just 5 houses, maybe that's considered a financial hardship or a timing hardship. But this is a very, very large development. Approvals were obtained from city planning in 2013 and 14 and need to be renewed. So I just wonder why not return there and create proper roadways with proper protections for these homeowners. Fire department also had comments, had to do with location of hydrants, height of dwellings, no parking anywhere on this route, which of course is impossible to enforce, really. Fire department ends up getting a restrictive declaration. It's a very long road. We end up inventing something, basically, so to give fire department the right to access the road and do whatever. I'm not sure what. Can they tow the cars? Like, what is the authority that this restrictive declaration actually gives them, as opposed to if this was a map street with a very long road and DOT comes in and puts parking tickets because it's a no parking sign, then no, there are no parking signs, then it's clear, no parking on this roadway. And the other part of it is when this goes to city planning, they might decide that no, 34 feet is not adequate for a road that services this many houses, that it needs to be 50 or it needs to be something else, right? So that's what the Department of City Planning is for planning. We're being asked to be involved in the planning process, and I don't think this is our job. DEP also had comments about drainage. Yeah, there's a lot of drainage comments, and those are my comments. Others?
Well, in a DCP's review of the subdivision and topography, they do look into not just meeting the minimum requirements, but they're also looking at the site planning aspect of it to ensure there is enough access to the site and the approachways would be the minimal requirement that would be required. So while it may not have gotten through the detailed review of DOT and DEP, maybe there is something in between that we can do without having to, where we can ask DOT to review this plan to see if this width is adequate. We have seen in many development 34 feet being adequate for FDNY access. And as a matter of fact, I was thinking about it. I was in Houston this weekend and I was looking at all those new suburban developments that are coming up. And those streets were not as wide as what actually we are seeing in this project. So, and those are much larger scale developments.
That's Houston.
I grant you, with a
It's
lot more
another place.
vehicular access, every house has 4 cars, and But my point is that I think we have seen developments with 34-foot width streets that meet safety NY access, and in this case, if we need to ensure. And DEP has requirements and that all the sanitary layouts and all of the sewer layouts, everything would be pursuant to DEP standards. And there has to be a way where we can tie that together to make sure that they meet all this requirement. I would be okay with it.
So one of the reasons that I want to bring this up is the way that not say the fire department, because they're really working with us closely, but the way that the other agencies review these cases, these GCL cases, is very, it's a cursory review. So DEP reviews it and just checks out whether there's a drainage plan. When I say drainage, I don't mean just the drainage for the sewers. I mean the entire site planning, because percolation and all of that are issues that especially in Staten Island, affect the planning of the site and adjacent properties, right? DEP doesn't look at that when they look at it on our behalf. They only are looking whether there's a connection to a sewer main. And DOT doesn't look at these sites at all because they have no jurisdiction over them. So the only time we hear from DOT is when it's an application to build in the bed of a map street. And the builder's pavement plan, they'll take a little brief look at, but the pavement plan only applies to the streets that they have jurisdiction over. So they won't look at the streets within the development. And we don't have any kind of structure in place for them to do that kind of detailed review that they do with city planning. Plus, city planning has on staff transportation planners, all kinds of professionals, because it's a huge agency. We don't have any of those kinds of people. And so there's got to be, and to add again, the havoc that these GCL waivers have imposed on Staten Island, we've seen on our visits. And we're being asked specifically by Staten Island officials to curb, let's say, pull back on the size of the properties or the size of the developments that are granted these waivers. So if you're talking about a development with 5 houses or maybe 10 houses, it's a different thing than when you move into 35 houses. And actually, the zoning resolution, when it was talking about private roads, hit this sort of number about 20 houses, beyond which it's no longer a private road. And so using 20 as something where city planning had considered that that's about the right scale, then I'm looking at it as that's about the right scale to maximize these GCL waivers that are, because why do they come to us? Why do the developers come to us? It's too much trouble at city planning, that's why. And that shouldn't be the reason that they come, because you're supposed to have a hardship.
Right, but I was not aware of there being a limit on the amount of homes that could be developed pursuant to a GCL 36 or a GCL 35 waiver. So what grounds do we have to deny this?
So there is a limit. The limit has to do with hardship, right? So the board has not consistently considered the subject of hardship. So what is the hardship in this case? That a 35 building, it's more than 35 units actually, should need to come to us. Like, what hardship are they experiencing other than they don't want to go to city planning because it's too much trouble? Right? So the original idea of the GCL waivers were, it's a homeowner, a couple of homeowners who need to get a break, right? That going through a mapping action when it's just a little piece of roadway is extreme. But when you're talking about, this is a very large development with a very long road, and we don't have any capabilities of reviewing all of the issues that come when you're developing a piece of property, which, by the way, in this case is a sloped site, so the drainage issues are very significant on a sloped site.
We've seen many GCLs that come to us with much longer roads, like, for instance, in the southwestern portion of Staten Island, that whole industrial loop is not built is not built fronting on a map street, and it's a huge road. It's about 400 feet.
But industrial loop has a very, very long history of being developed. When we're seeing them now, it's one development being added, one literally commercial site being added to industrial loop when they are driving past lots and lots of other commercial sites. This is creating from scratch a new neighborhood, which is different than a few houses. You know, the other ones we're looking at, it's 5 houses, it's 4 houses.
Right, but this is a lot that was sold with development rights to it, and to me, the hardship is in not being able to fully utilize your development rights unless you get the GCL waiver that allows you to have a development not fronting on a mapped street.
Or you get a mapping action, which is how roads are created in the city.
Right, but don't you think that if it's in the city's interest that people don't take advantage of the GCL 36, and it should be written into the law that this waiver is only for properties not to exceed 20 homes, or only for properties under 24,000 square feet. I just don't see that we have a legal leg to stand on to make limitations ourselves to serve politicians who don't want to do the hard work of changing the law. And I've stated this on many of these occasions. I just don't agree.
And I'll be just careful as I'm hearing this. I'm thinking, as a developer, what would I do to get out of the 20-unit max? I would probably come to you in phases and do bit by bit. So
That's happening.
Subdivide.
But subdivide
the lot.
But at the end, the result would be the same. And the question is, in this case, as I'm looking at this plan, I mean, this is one of the most typical layout that you would see in Staten Island, even if, let's say, we were to map a city street. It's a 200-foot wide lot with, so you have a 400-foot street. It's not that different. And the width of the streets are very similar to what we see in Staten Island today, even the mapped ones or the built ones. So I understand the concern of the drainage and other things that maybe in this case we ask DEP to review some of those on details, or they get the DEP. But
we don't have
other than that
capability.
I think, this site has a as Commissioner Otley Brown is saying, this site has a requirement of providing a certain amount of floor area. And it has gone through the city planning review with regards to the site planning subdivision, and they do look into the site to make sure there's adequate access and egress to this.
So just a question, so I'm going to raise it. There's an application for, I don't remember how many houses, 200 houses.
168 units.
168 units. Same thing. So at what point does the BSA take responsibility for not creating the havoc that we know, because we've seen, that it has historically created? So, that, I think that's part of the job of this agency, is to look at where it's okay to be granting waivers and where it just moves into the place of not being okay, which it's a discretionary decision. There is a point at which certain kinds of waivers should not be granted, right? Whatever kind we're
But
talking
these are
about.
zoning compliant homes. This isn't a situation where what they want to build is in max of what's allowable to build. This is a land that was sold with development rights attached to it. It was sold by the city. So I don't know that we have a right to limit the development as long as they provide access. I believe that the GCL 36 is all about providing access, most especially emergency access. And so if these homes provide that access and emergency access, I just don't see how we could say no. And I don't think that that's really up to us to judge whether we think 168 homes on a lot is too many. If that lot has got development rights to support the building of 168
But then what you're
homes.
suggesting is bypassing entirely a mapping action always. Because once...
Then legal loopholes need to be closed legally. If we don't want people to bypass the city planning mapping procedure, then there's got to be a legal closure of a loophole that allows them to pursue a GCL.
All right.
I would add, though, that I think we shouldn't be just looking at emergency exit. We need to make sure that it doesn't create a vehicular bottleneck. And honestly speaking, just looking at this plan, way it has been distributed, it has more than one access points from this road, so it's not going to create a vehicular bottleneck to the street. Had this just had one entrance with a loop in between, that would have been more negative to the flow of traffic.
But you wouldn't have gotten as many houses in, so they had to do it like this.
Right, and
It's a very dense development. Not that I'm commenting on the density. If zoning allows it, zoning allows it. That's not at all what I'm commenting on. I'm commenting on how planning is done in New York City. Planning is done by planners at the Department of City Planning. This is a neighborhood. So the question is, would it fit in with planning requirements if it was a mapping action? And mapping actions were created for a reason and managed by the Department of City Planning for a reason. So that's where we are not a planning agency.
I understand your concern, and I think this is something I think it's not a bad idea for us to explore with DEP and DOT to see if they would review some of these applications, give layout as part of these GCLs, some requirements of the minimum drainage size and all of those that they would have to meet and have it reviewed prior to the construction. And that's a separate discussion for us to have with DEP to see how we can engage them in these GCLs. Because at the end, it will affect the drainage system and flow into the Richmond Valley Road. So using that as an argument, they need to look at how the topography and all of that is going to...
We don't have
But
a mechanism.
I think we should also find out from city planning when they are reviewing these, how much of these topographic analysis they do look into the gradations and how that affects the drainage. I had worked on one project, I don't have a very clear understanding of it, so it might be good to get that clarification from them.
I believe we could ask the applicant to provide us with some watershed analysis from the drainage perspective to look at whether this watershed, the new development, would cause any like local flooding or drainage issues. And we can send this package to the DEP to look at it. If they say no, I believe we can send it to somebody else, like the city planning, if they have capabilities to look at something like that. And at the end, if we hear from nobody, we can put a condition that DEP should look at this study and make sure that everything is covered. So,
Though this site does not,
I do
your
understand.
conversation struck on another idea, and I don't know if we can follow that, is that though this site does not qualify as a residential large scale, when city planning does review residential large scale, they're also, building in streets into it. So maybe it might be worth it to know how they go about that and what are the requirements they look for and how do they engage DEP and the analysis that Commissioner Shetta is saying, how those could be all incorporated to ensure that we get a project that does not create, local flooding and those kind of issues.
Yeah, I believe for a development of that scale, that big site, it's worth it to run some sort of drainage analysis, see if the model predicts any flooding at any specific location, and try to tweak that. And at the end, when they submit to us the final drainage plan, it should be without issues. We should take that with the study, with the final version of that study, and send them to either DEP or CP, and they look at it. And if they are okay with it, then we cover the whole.
Right. Well, that brings up, I think, something quite interesting, because we do have a checklist that mapping actions require. And though I didn't want to do this because we don't have a staff that can review any of this, so we depend totally on another agency to do it. And as I say, so far, we've only gotten cursory reviews on this by the other agencies, but maybe what we can do in this case is just require that all the criteria that a mapping action demands is met, is pursued, is that they provide all those, whatever they are, all those analyses and so on. So, but in the end, you end up with a road that doesn't belong to the city, that is hard to enforce, and that, the property owners are surprised to learn they're responsible for. Because again, just because it's recorded, a declaration's recorded at your property, against your property, doesn't mean your lawyer tells you. That's extremely common, right? So all of a sudden you get a bill, you're told, the sewer's not working, you're assessed for this much money, and everybody's like, hey, wait a minute, that's the city's job. Nope, not the city's job, your job. There was a paper attached to your deed and you didn't know it.
And I think to that, Commissioner Otley Brown's point is well taken. There has to be more of a legal way of fixing that issue.
Right. So it's a state law, right? So you see how easily it is to change laws in the state of New York.
Or maybe through city planning exchange.
Well, what does city planning do, right? It can't affect the GCL, it's a state law. So, okay.
Move on?
Yep.
Item number 10, 2017-320 BZY, 432 East 58th Street, Manhattan.
Sorry, Chair, before you begin your comments on the actual substance of this application, I'd like to, if I may, address an issue that's arisen with regard to this application in the weeks leading up to this hearing. On March 30th, Mr. Jim Power, who represents the appellant in this case, wrote a letter to my attention and submitted it into the public record, disclosing his understanding that in February 2016, while employed at Langen Engineering, Commissioner Nasser Shida allegedly performed work for development at the subject site for a previous owner, specifically a subport of excavation or SOE design. Commissioner Shida does not recall performing any work with regard to this property, and further is of the opinion that a bill for only 2 hours of work on an SOE design, the completion of which necessitates billing far more hours, suggests that the alleged work was not at all substantive in nature and was instead for purposes of providing a cost estimate. On Friday, Hiller PC, the legal representatives of East River 50s Alliance, appearing in opposition to this application, sent a letter requesting Dr. Shita's recusal based on likelihood that Commissioner Shita had a pre-existing perspective with respect to Langen. Chapter 68 of the New York City Charter, the city's conflicts of interest law, does not have a pre-employment restriction for public servants. It only involves a public servant's current and future positions and interests. Thus, so long as a public servant no longer has a continuing ownership interest in either their prior employer or the projects on which they worked, neither of which I'll note Commissioner Shita retains with respect to Langen, the law does not prohibit that public servant from participating in matters concerning that prior employer or project. Additionally, Commissioner Shita's alleged work was for a prior design, not part of the project presently before the board. Mr. Hiller raised an additional issue in his April 6th letter, and that is a request that Kramer-Levin be disqualified from representing the applicant on this application due to past and perhaps present work on behalf of the mayor and the city of New York, which, quote, would create the appearance of impropriety. Mr. Hiller does not allege fraud or other misconduct before this agency. Thus, I am not certain that this is the correct venue for such a claim. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Right, so to get to the substance of the
So,
application.
Chair, can I say something before we start, please? Yeah, so I been informed about this probably like 10 days ago, and I waited until I looked at the project, and I really do not recall that I touched this project during my employment with Langen. Touched means I never even heard of that kind of project coming to the part of Langen that I was working for.
Okay.
So my understanding, and I'm new with public work and with the BSA, just for a month maybe, and I'm still investigating the new work that I came to. And my understanding that I'm employed by the public. I do work for the public of the city, and I'm happy with that. And I believe on this case, I did look at the documents, and I believe on this case, if there is, like, if the public needs some sort of help for somebody to look at this right, efficiently, and correctly, I believe I could be that person. But over the weekend, I was thinking seriously, should I recuse? I do like headache, so should I recuse myself and just get peace of mind, or should I continue looking at this? And based on my thinking over the weekend, and since I believe that I could be helpful to the public of the city, my decision was no, I'm not going to recuse myself, and I'm going to continue looking at this. So.
And we appreciate that, because actually an enormous amount of the materials that we're looking at are about supportive excavation, and I know some things, but I'm far from a skilled geotechnical engineer. So your input is essential on this, and I do want to add that the Conflict of Interest Board does not require recusal unless you are being paid by the entity that is appearing before the board. And so, since you now are a full-time commissioner, paid by the city, and have no affiliations any longer with Langen, there is no requirement under the law to recuse. Okay. So, we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board 6 recommends denial. I note we did get a lot of submissions from community members. I didn't actually count the number of letters. Normally I count them, but I didn't have time. There is a lot of community interest in this application, as the project was the target of the rezoning effort that ultimately resulted in amending the zoning resolution to require tower on a base regulations to apply on narrow streets in a circumscribed area within this zoning district. And since foundations had not been completed on the project by the date of the zoning text amendment, the permit lapsed by operation of law under section 11-331 of the zoning resolution. Our authority on this application is limited to considering whether the findings for a zoning resolution section 11-331 renewal of the building permit and 6 months extension of time to complete construction of foundations have been met. If they have, the statute requires us to grant. Unlike with common law vested rights cases or repeated extensions of time to complete construction where there has been a long delay, I am unaware of any case law that permits the board to deviate from making the statutory findings. Those findings are that the building permit was lawfully issued based on a Department of Buildings approved and complete set of plans and specifications for the entire project and not just a portion of the project, that excavation was completed on the date of the amendment and the consequent lapse of the permit, and that substantial progress has been made on the foundations on the date of the permit's lapse. That's the extent of what we can look at. The applicant, to this point, the applicant provided a set of construction drawings marked approved by a Department of Buildings plans examiner on October 2nd, 2017, and subsequently a post-approval amendment set of drawings on October 30th, 2017, both of which were marked approved. The DOP provided a March 8th, 2018 letter stating that the permits were lawfully issued, and this board relies on those statements always by the Department of Buildings that the permit was lawfully issued. The record is very large and demonstrates with daily logs prepared by construction superintendents and detailed site observation reports prepared by structural engineers and accompanied by photographs and progress drawings exactly how much work was performed each day, and invoices and payment requisitions to show exactly how much work was in place by the end of the payment period. Those materials indicate that all of the excavation work was completed and that at least 80% of the foundation work was completed as of the permit lapse date. The DOB inspector also stated in the inspection report prepared on November 30th, 2017, which is the lapse date, where he was there upon the issuance of the stop work order, stating that foundations were 80% complete, such that there was no automatic vesting of the project under Section 11-331A. Opposition counsel's assertion that the concrete pours on November 11th and November 18th were done without Department of Transportation permits to occupy the roadbed with equipment does not appear to be supported by the evidence, as the applicant produced copies of those after-hours, or those street occupancy permits and the after-hours permits. I did have a few questions, though, for the applicant. There's a photo taken on November 30th of 17 by WSP Concrete showing rebar cage. This is probably something that Commissioner Shada can just answer. And I'm just trying to understand what that cage is for. Is that the rebar cage for the mat slab that they're pouring that day?
Yes,
Yes.
slightly yes.
Okay. I'd also like a description from the applicant on the work remaining to be done. I'd like them to explain how the description of the work remaining to be done, such as certain shear walls and columns, ground floor slab, is properly left outside of the scope of the foundation work as indicated on the color-coded markup foundation drawings. They use a different code to indicate that this is superstructure work, and I'd like them to explain why that falls into superstructure. So that would be for tomorrow, and then you can speak to their engineer about it. To the opposition's point about the remaining work to be completed on the foundations after the permit lapse date, the applicant should elaborate and explain why work to stabilize the site lasted so long and which portion of that work was related to the foundations, because some of it they say is superstructure work. With respect to the work that was conducted beyond after-hours work permits, in particular on the pour dates, I'd like the applicant to clarify what was excluded from costs and progress. And so, of course, no work performed after hours without a valid after-hours permit can be included in the analyses. They told us that they removed certain number of cubic yards of the pour and so on, but I'd like more clarification because they put down blankets, they did other things presumably after hours, and so were those costs also excluded? That, just to be clear, that they're not counting anything after the after-hours permits, all of which say 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. for the after-hour permits on 11/11 and 11/18.
So you wanted them to take whatever after 6, take it out?
Take it out. So they were saying, okay, we won't count the 30 cubic yards and the 60 cubic yards that were poured after that time, but according to opposition, other things were done after that time, and if that work was figured into the costs,
Yes.
And might have indicated that they didn't finish something, like, I don't know, the blankets were there because it wouldn't have cured, I don't know. I mean, meanwhile, we're talking about a huge amount of money that's in the foundations.
When it comes to the concrete pour, I believe we could ask them to bring us the concrete tickets for the concrete trucks that deliver the concrete to the site. These trucks usually come with a ticket that has the time they arrive on site.
And how many cubic yards?
Each truck, it's a standard truck, it's 11 cubic yards. So the ticket shows that in addition. So we ask the applicant to provide us with the concrete tickets for the, whatever I believe, 800 cubic yards for the entire pour of the foundation. Which truck arrived when, how much concrete was put on that truck. So we can follow which truck was poured, like within the time frame from 8 to 6, and which truck was poured after that. I've read something else about street closure. I'm not sure how can we like look at this. I saw that one of the opposition is talking about they didn't get a permit from the DOT to have street closures. He saw some like flagmen waving, like the taking traffic to other streets. I'm not sure how can we look into that. We don't have photos, we don't have videos, unless the opposition can provide us with something that we can look at and communicate with the DOT whether they issued like street closure permits or not. I don't think we can do anything about that.
What I was thinking is the applicant did give us copies of their street closure permits, and I'm not that familiar with what they should look like. So what we can do is give that to DOT to confirm for us that that is an adequate permit to allow a full occupancy or a half occupancy of the roadbed.
Yep.
Because one of them only requires an 11-foot clearance, and the other one didn't have any caveat like that. So I read that as not requiring clearance, but I don't know. So we could have DOT just confirm for us.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Shedd, are you saying there are no pour tickets in the, concrete pour tickets in the?
I'm not sure if we got them. I looked at the inspection reports.
There are pour tickets here.
We need the 4 tickets, along with if they can give us like a spreadsheet table ticket number, date, volume, time, so it could be easy for us.
It appears that some of that's in there, but you may want to take a look.
I will retake a look at it.
Okay.
But if we don't have, if they haven't submitted this, please give us like a spreadsheet with all the tickets.
I don't think they
Number them, give them an ID, and
Right.
give us the quantity of the concrete, the time it arrived, so it's gonna be easier for us to look at that spreadsheet and see which concrete was poured before and which concrete was poured after 6 p.m. So we can exclude whatever illegit concrete pour on that side.
That's something that they could actually do today, right? So if I know they gave us invoices for tons of things, right? But they
It's an
didn't.
attachment 5IC, I think it's called, 5C. I'm sorry, was it that 5C? There's a letter, 5I, I apologize. It's a concrete pour tracking item, and it was submitted on 12/20/2017. There's some information from Ferrara Brothers and pour tickets dated, and some cubic yards and stuff. Maybe that's something that we can use and they can elaborate on that and add additional information.
Usually they give us the raw material. We don't have time to, like, when they give us the inspection reports, I don't have time to go over 1,500 inspection report and grab the time out of that.
Right.
So if they can give us summary, and we're gonna take this summary and do spot checks with the inspection reports. And when we feel like this is good, we're gonna run the numbers, see which concrete was poured from 8 to 6 and which concrete was poured after that.
Okay,
That would be really helpful. Okay.
thank you.
We also got a plan. I'm not sure if you finished, Chair?
No, go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, we got some foundation plans and SOE plans, and these plans show what was done by the enactment date and what was remaining. And they left it to us to figure out how much foundation was done by that date. Like we did before on similar cases, I would like the engineer, the structural, the geotech combination of these, and the construction manager, of course, to give us a statement on these plans, saying that the work was done per the requirements of the building code. So none of the work included on these plans is done in violation of the code. So everything is done and good to go. This is the second part, this is the first part of the statement. The second part, we want to get a statement on how much percentage of that work represent out of the total foundation work or quantity or budget. So it should mention that name of the engineer, certified that the work indicated was done per the requirement, to satisfy the requirement of the New York City the applicable New York City building code. And that work represents, let's say, 80% of the foundation. So I don't want to like go into like estimating how much percentage of the foundation was done. And then again, we'll take that statement and we'll do some spot checks and make sure that it's accurate.
Okay, so because for what I'm used to doing from my work that I used to do, I rely on those requisitions for payment. So when the contractor claims on the site that they put in 60% of the total of their contract, their subcontract, and then all the various people who are reviewing, the bank is reviewing it, the field supervisor is reviewing it, construction managers, all of those are, and the owner's rep are reviewing that same requisition for payment, and they agree. Sometimes there's deductions. No, we don't agree. We reduce this one to 40%. We reduce this one to 30%, like that. There's the requisition for payment that we saw, for which a check was cut, indicates that all parties agreed on the percentage, and that's how much the contractor was paid on that date, right? So they've already, in the field, calculated work in place, work in storage, that kind of stuff, right? So you're doing it in another way, because that's right?
When I'm asking the engineer to put how much percentage of the done work represent out of the total foundation work, they could do it the way you just described. But my concern is two things. Number one, the ZR indicate that substantial part of the foundation is in place.
Right.
It didn't say substantial cost of the foundation cost was given to the contractor. It didn't say that.
Right. That's
So this is one thing. The second thing, you could, let's say you have a building on a mat foundation, and the contractor poured that mat foundation by the effective date. And a week later, they discovered that the concrete was bad. So they have to rip the entire mat and take it out and put new mat foundation. And in between the day they're gonna rip it and the day they finished it, we grant this request. We say, yes, you're vested, you're good to go. And the public later stop by the site and see this mat foundation is gone, and now they are building new mat foundation. This is a big deal for us.
Yes.
We're gonna look bad. So what I'm asking for is two things. Number one, percentage. Number two, the work is good, per the requirement of the code. Number three, sign and seal, done. And we're gonna look at this and check that too.
That makes sense, okay. Okay. Makes sense. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? No? No? Okay.
Zoning calendar, decision items, item number 11, 128-15BZ to 130-15BZ, 680, 682, 684 Van Duzer Street, Staten Island.
Okay,
Oops, sorry.
so I wanted to make sure that there was a financial analysis that was submitted on 322 that was sitting in a different folder. I think it was just there to make a couple of
It
corrections.
was just correcting the construction costs that I had detailed in the other hearing that just didn't match up from page to page.
Okay, so, okay. Okay. As requested, a roof plan and side elevations were provided because we wanted the set to be complete, which actually, though, it's been looking like this since we concluded that we needed 3 units and an access from the side road. But they drew my attention to the very high roof line that penetrates the 36-foot high maximum height. The drawing refers to section ZR 119-212 for that height, which is the height regulations for Tier 2 sites in the Special Hillside Preservation District, and which allow you to measure the height of the building to the midpoint of the pitched roof. According to the zoning calculation sheet, though, on their drawings, this is a Tier 1 site. So according to that, section 119-212 doesn't apply. I don't know, tier 1 has to do with whether the slope is more than 10% or less than 10%. So I don't know whether they just made a typo and it really is a tier 2 site, or what, but if it isn't a tier 2 site, then they need to correct the drawing to show the right zoning resolution section, which in that case would be sky exposure plane, which I think they're still fine on because they're set back from the street. So they just need to make reference to the right section. In the zoning resolution, that's one, changing one word, basically. The builder's pavement plan was amended to reflect the change in location of the traffic light and access to the site. And I just want to know if we're good with the EAS, because, okay, yes, okay. Okay. Yes. I think we're good? Yeah. That was a yes. Tony?
Oh, okay. No, I thought you had something else to say.
No.
Okay. Item number 12, 2017-190BZ, 2311 31st Road, Queens. Received the ZDR1 and the CCD?
Correct. So that's what we were waiting for, the ZRD1 and the CCD1 sign-off on flood regulation compliance. And I just wanted to say that what was stated in this ZRD1 and CCD1 should be incorporated into our resolution, so we're clear that that the application or the materials comply with what was required by DOB when they signed off on that, okay? And I'm going to repeat tomorrow what I had read at the last review session to just clarify what the scope of this is, but I also wanted to say that will mean that there are conditions imposed on this application because the intention of the expansion of the Cornell Doctrine for low-income housing has to be really circumscribed. So there will be a set of conditions that only allow this project to be developed this way, and to make it clear to all future comers that those are the qualifications. And so there isn't any room for movement.
Okay.
Okay?
I also just want to note for the calendar that there was also a hearing on March 20th, 2018. That was missing. From
And actually, that was the date it was closed.
Yeah.
It shows closed
You know,
on
we're
January.
updating.
But I think we.
Madam
picked
Chair
that
let
up.
us know that.
Oh,
we
okay,
updated,
okay.
yeah.
Sorry, missed that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't always CC you on like corrections to the calendar. I'm like, I think you have enough emails. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, continued hearing items, item number 13, 10415BC, 442 Broadway, Manhattan.
Okay. All right. This case had to be renoticed since it was last heard in December 2016 and dismissed in July 2017 and reinstated in October 17. I believe notice was served, but can you just, okay. Because I wasn't actually able to open it.
Yes, it was in February.
Okay, good, okay. So we have a March 19th letter of objection from the neighbors adjacent to the property at 49-55 Wadsworth Terrace, who are concerned about the impact of this new building on the structure of their old building because of the nature of the palisade against which this building is being built. The building as now proposed, so we looked at this a very long time ago, the building as now proposed is 12 stories, the previous was 16, with the easternmost portion at 9 stories and several of the previously requested waivers, for example, for loading berth, retail on the second floor, and parking eliminated and others reduced. The FAR request is still 2 times the allowable, as is the density, with a 30 dwelling unit increase, actually, over the previously proposed 16-story building, so there's far more units, but many more studios in this one. The zoning calculation sheet on the plans and the statement of facts need to be updated to reflect the correct waivers being requested, because it actually still indicates loading dock and things like that. The as-of-right schemes provided for quality housing and height factor. But I don't see how open space ratio calculations for the height factor, I don't see any open space ratio calculations for the height factor project, so I don't understand how the FAR is determined. You need to know what the coverage is, and there's a formula. You can't just pick the highest height factor and decide it applies to this site. The height factor cellar floor at the upper split level is shown as storage, and you would never build that, so I didn't understand why they even show it. There's also a 2-story commercial base that isn't permitted, so that's not an as-of-right project. The sections show different uses than the plans in this as-of-rights, and different programming from the proposed, so that needs to be cleaned up because it's actually a mess. The proposed shows the building is built to the property line at the east, whereas the as-of-right is built between 8 and 10 feet short of that line, so I understand that, and building closer to the property line is more money, more cutting, everything. I also don't actually understand why the building is being designed to sort of creep up the wall of the palisade. It seems like that is adding to the costs unnecessarily, and it's sort of stepping up the wall. It's not like they shear the wall off and then they build up against it. It steps up the wall, so it seems like it's creating these cantilevers, sort of, even though it's bearing on rock. In addition, the apartments in that back area are really strange with poor access to legal light and air. So it seems to me that that design is creating an undesirable unit rather than actually going for a more practical design where you'd create better units with better light and air. And, you know, the idea of the financials then saying, well, we can't rent this unit for very much because it's a lousy unit. So the proposed also has quality housing deductions taken for daylight in corridors where I don't see the daylight source, so you can't take those deductions. And in general, with respect to the requested waivers, when in a non-contextual district, I don't know how quality housing is used for the basis for the waivers when the whole point of quality housing is contextual design. So it seems like this should really be a height factor analysis and the waivers based on height factor requirements, since quality housing is not required here. The project and premium costs have gone up a lot since the last review. I don't understand this if the building is 4 stories shorter. The building continues to be very tall for the area, and the neighborhood character explanation in the statement of facts asks that we look at the building as if it was sitting on the palisade and add the height of the palisade to the building, and then it's perfect, it fits right in. So it isn't sitting on the palisade, it's below the palisade. I think that's kind of the point. It shouldn't be as high as palisade buildings. At the last hearings, we asked why the building is being built to cantilever over the subway tunnel at the front corner. And we asked what would happen to construction costs if that cantilever was eliminated, and that was never answered, nor was a scheme provided that actually does that. So this project is being proposed now at 30% affordable, and the rents are being adjusted to reflect this. Correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner Otley-Brown, but my understanding is that the board's approach in cases where the developer is for-profit and there's no obligation to develop affordable units and no way for the board to enforce such a mix, that the analysis must be based on market rate units, because it's totally different than when we're working with a not-for-profit who does that for a living and only builds affordable units.
You know what, actually, and I would have to look back on other cases just to make sure what you're saying is right, but I did have questions about the comparables and the rents that it suggests for the market rate. But whether or not you have to use market for the entire thing, you're probably right, but I would have to look at another development we have. I can't speak on that today.
Because they leave us and then they build a market rate building, right? And
the only thing that would stop them would be that they are subject to 421A option C. So that's going to enforce the fact that the regulated apartments stay regulated. So I would assume that's a check in this case because they are taking part in that 421A. If they weren't, then I would agree with you that there would be no way of tracking whether or not they're going to stay with regulated rents down the line.
So that means then the HPD gets involved in the 421A project?
Yes.
Yeah, I have some comments on that.
Yeah. So can you, I don't know how you find this, but can you check other 421As that we've done to see whether we allowed, lower rents?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments?
Okay, so I want to go back to one comment that had raised at the initial hearing, and that has to do with the typical plan. The orientation of the typical plan does not correspond with the site orientation with regards to wide and narrow street, and this has an implication with regards to how FAR and height is being utilized. The subject site has a narrow frontage on Broadway, which is a wide street, and the rest is along Fairview Avenue, which is a narrow street. The orientation of the typical building is just the opposite. And this enables the building to maintain a higher street wall in the typical case, and has a 10-foot setback as opposed to a 15-foot setback. And more importantly, the application of the FAR on a narrow street with inclusionary housing bonus is 3.6, whereas on a wide street it's 4.6. So that needs to be corrected, and this would actually allow, if we were to, this will allow for a maximum of 98,200 square foot of residential floor area and not 105,741, as analyzed in typical.
Could you just repeat that number? Would allow what?
If the typical, if we reversed it, and instead of the wide street being the narrow street, then it would allow for a 98,200 square foot of floor area, not what has been analyzed here, which is 105,741. So that's one question. I do have comments on how the zoning calculation has been prepared, not just for the as of right, but also for the proposed. It does not show how the inclusionary housing bonus is being factored into the analysis. It just shows like the daylight saving, but it didn't factor in the inclusionary. And since they are seeking a waiver of the unit count, it will also affect the unit size for affordable housing units. Per zoning resolution section 2396D, size of affordable units are very prescribed, and many of the affordable units, as indicated in the plan, do not meet those requirements. So they would need a waiver. Are they needing a waiver? That's an additional objection, and that would be an additional objection on the DOB sheet.
So wait a second. So the affordable unit, the zoning resolution limits the size of the affordable unit.
So for, let's say, in a new construction affordable housing and substantial rehabilitation affordable housing, I won't get into detail, 400 square foot of floor area within the perimeter wall height for a 0-bedroom, which is a studio, 575 square feet of floor area within the perimeter wall of 1-bedroom, 775 square feet of floor area within the perimeter walls of 2-bedroom, and 950 for a 3-bedroom. So it's very prescribed as per the zoning regulation for affordable housing. The units that have been shown in the plans for the affordable housing are not meeting those requirements, so they would need a waiver. That leads to the question of, will then HPD grant a certificate for an inclusionary housing unit where it does not meet that requirement? Secondly, as I quickly glanced through it, and this was based on my past practice in architecture, the division at HPD, I don't think it also meets the inclusionary housing unit distribution or the stacking plan per 23-96B. So that would also have to be revised. And so we need to, I would say, following up on what Commissioner Otley Brown was saying, is that if they are proposing inclusionary housing, we should have this plan reviewed, the stacking plan and all of those reviewed, and have a clear understanding, would this meet the HPD requirements for HPD to grant an inclusion? And that would also give us the assurance that if they are proposing to use the inclusionary housing bonus and proposing affordable housing, that it would get built and HPD would then grant a certificate once it's approved.
Wow, thank you. That was impressive. Okay. Okay.
I had financial comments. There were a number of comments that I made at the first set of hearings. Of course, this project has now changed a little bit. Some of those comments are no longer relevant. some of them are, but it would be helpful if when the applicant responds, they include certain portions of the narrative from the first report in this second report, because what this second report does is it's kind of got a lot of shorthand stuff in it, in that it goes to some of the comments I had, and it provides new information to satisfy the issue of the rental apartments versus sold, but it doesn't go into detail, like, for instance, for retail, how they're valuing the different floors of space, which they did in the first report, and it would be helpful to have as just a check this time around. The site value was redone as per my questions in the first report concerning the proper FAR that should have been used to divide into the sales price.
But that's because it was a community facility FAR.
Right, and we wanted it done based on the residential, and it has been done based on the
But now,
residential.
maybe based on what Commissioner Shonda said, it's a different FAR. No, if it's, or that was only for the typical.
That's for the typical.
Okay.
The
Right,
FAR
but
stays the same regardless.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it should be,
Sharing housing area.
it should be the same. I think it's 3.6, I believe, is what they used. So it should be 3.62 for the site value, should be straight across the board. So if
Right.
you're saying there should be an adjustment down, then they're going to have to redo it.
Right.
Because they did it based on
I-
3.62,
I
so.
unfortunately didn't have a chance to look at the typical plant, so, and if it is less than, if they're using 3.6, then that's okay. But if they're using 4.6, which would apply to a wider street, then that would need to be adjusted.
So they're erring on the lower side would be fine, but if they're trying to do an adjusted maximum,
Right.
then they have to correct it.
Right, in terms of the FAR. However, in terms of the bulk, it's a different, we still have to flip it.
Right.
I mean, and the height and setback, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So, and I believe the site value went up quite a bit since the first report, but I don't have a copy of the earlier report.
Okay.
But still in all, it's, the comps were fine. They were similar zoning or same zoning. So I don't have any other question for the site value other than to just know what the site value was in the first report. The retail comparables, originally, I had questions about the appropriateness of the retail comparables that were used. I didn't think it was getting at the value. Now, at this report, I have those same comments. First of all, there was no change in the price per square foot since the first report, which was 2 years ago. And I have a feeling that asking rents have gone up since then. All of the comparables appear to be inferior to the subject site, which has 2 above-grade Broadway-facing floors and high ceiling heights. The location of some of the comps used are actually too far away from the subject, down on 131st Street and 135th Street, with no explanation as to why they couldn't find anything closer. The parking spaces, $310 monthly rent, which was the same as the report 2 years ago. And there's a 5% adjustment negative for asking status. And I didn't know that parking was so abundant that they would be able to be negotiated. So if they want to keep that 5% in, they really need to give me some kind of narrative as to why there's so many parking spaces in the area that they can't give them away, so to speak. As for the residential rents, the regulated rents are set by HPD, I believe. But the market rents are not, and they're based on the market. And so the applicant has to be careful in the comparables that they use to ensure that the rents are actually market rents. And here you can't entirely be sure. I checked a lot of the buildings that these comparables come from, and they're actually listed on the New York State regulated, New York State Housing Community Renewal Database for regulated rental buildings. They're actually listed there as having regulated rental apartments. And so some of these buildings are quite old and not at all comparable to what we're getting. But the rents that they're using, even in some of the newer buildings are also on this site. So I question whether or not they're actually using regulated rental comparables for the market rent, and that's a no-no. So they need to prove to me that the apartment rents are actually market rents. And that's what I have so far.
Thank you.
Yep, bear with me. Okay, so we got the SOE drawings, we got some boring logs. We didn't get the complete geotechnical report. I would like to get that. I want to see the complete geotechnical report for the projects, including the recommendations that were incorporated in the drawings that were used to estimate the cost submitted to us. So this is one minor thing. The hardship claimed was mainly based on a report prepared by the project structure engineer. It's called structural hardship report, that included mainly 3 hardship sources. I'll go over them one by one. The first one is the irregular shape of the site. They are indicating that this irregular shape of the site giving them some hardship. The main issue with the irregular shaped site is they are claiming that they cannot go with equally spaced or equally spanned beams. To explain this, let's say we have a bridge, 1,000 feet spanning from this side to this side, and you want to build this bridge using, let's say, 4 spans. So the question here is it good to make it 4 equal spans, each span is 250 feet, or to make it, let's say, 150, 150, and then take the rest and divide it between the other 2? According to their report, they are claiming that they cannot build equally spanned beams, and this is for them a hardship. It contributes to increasing the cost of the concrete structure they are building. Actually, based on some information in the structural world, I believe this is against the fundamentals of the structural engineering. Oh. There are many tons of publications about this in what's so-called structural optimization. If they go over one of these publications, they would realize that the optimum design of this bridge is not 4 equal spans, each is 25. It could be actually 300, 300, and then 200, 200. So actually going with non-equal spans, non-uniform spanning, helps the structural optimization, minimizing the cost. If they have reference that's conveying something contradicting this, I would like to take a look at it. This is point 1. We need an explanation from the design team on why design/construction of irregular shaped site would be more complicated than conventional rectangular site. This is the second point they are talking about. They are saying that if you, let's say you want to build a room, concrete, you want to put concrete roof for a land lot. If this land lot is rectangular, let's say 50 by 100, it's much easier to build it. For something, if you have a trapezoidal shaped lot, they are saying that it could be more complicated to build this. It could be much more expensive than a rectangular lot. My understanding is the only, especially with concrete structures, the only issue here is when you put the formwork, you need to make them trapezoidal rather than rectangular, which is not a big deal. I did this tons of times. And when you put the steel rebar, the reinforcement bars themselves, at the edges, you have to cut them to size. So there is extra cost, but it's not like 50% increase in the cost. It could be 5% or so, not more than that. It's a labor cost, it's not material cost. So that need to be relooked at.
So, and that was with respect to the superstructure and the foundation system.
This is the superstructure.
Superstructure.
I'm coming to the foundation.
Okay.
Also, I'm asking them to please define and explain the common site. When they claimed hardship, especially with the subsurface conditions, usually when somebody claims hardship with the subsurface, saying that the subsurface conditions have something odd. So we need to get waiver on this. What they typically do is they consider a very similar site but without this odd thing. And they call this common or typical site, like we saw in 19th Street. And they compare the cost for that typical site to the cost for the actual site. I didn't see the plans or any information, just cost estimate for the typical / common site. So I would like to get the plans for the common site as well. When I say plans, I mean the plans that were used to perform the cost estimate, the drawings, the structural drawings, even if they are schematic. I want to get these drawings also for the other, not the common site, for the proposed site. I would like to get the structural drawings, the foundation plan, so I can follow up. If they are giving me 500 cubic yards for concrete for the footings, I'm not going to take this for granted. I want to make sure that this 500 is not 400 or is not 450. I want to make sure that they are already 500. So for the cost estimate, I'm asking them to give me details of the quantity survey for all the items that are implemented in the cost estimate and the drawings / documents. Again, I repeat it, even if they are schematic, based on which they came up with this cost. So I can look at the numbers and see whether they are using numbers close to reality or they are deviating from that. Then the second chapter of the, also I'm sorry, on this specific, the irregularity topic, there is a figure in the structural hardship report. It's called figure 2. And they are using this figure to evidence that the design and the construction of the building is very complicated. I looked at this figure, I believe I understood it. But this figure, if they are putting this figure in the report to say it's complicated, yes, it is complicated. I believe it's part of a computer analysis, structural analysis for the building, so it should be complicated. I'm not sure why this is used to indicate that the construction of that building is complicated. This is just part, this is how it's done. The structural engineer sits on the computer, put the plan, and run a computer code that analyze this. It's not done by hand, or it's not gonna be built like that. If they have something different to what I'm saying, I would like to listen to them, and they can give me explanations why they consider figure 2 is complicated. Please provide basis of the summary of cost indicated, including all structural drawings and foundation plans. So this is repetition for what I said before. The second chapter of that structural hardship is called transit authority structure. And this is, in summary, they are claiming because of the adjacent tunnel, TA tunnel, they are saying that they will need to build like a secant pile wall next to that tunnel. I did tons of SOE design in the city, and I would say the latest SOE I did before coming to the board, that was 5 feet away from the tunnel at Flatbush with Willoughby Street, 5 feet away literally. And that wasn't a secant pile wall. It was a soldier pile and lagging wall, which cost probably 20 or 30% maximum of a secant pile wall. So I'm not sure why they are electing to go with a secant pile wall on this project. Although secant pile wall, again, I like to explain. Secant pile wall is an SOE system, excavation support system. The only occasion that we go to the secant pile wall is when we have ground to return, and in the meantime we have groundwater that we want to prevent from entering from the sides of the excavation. This is the only occasion we need secant pile wall. If you have a site with one piece of it on the sides that doesn't have secant pile wall, the secant pile wall is useless. On this site, all the sides are soldier pile and lagging walls, except for the TA. So I'm not sure why they elected to go with the secant pile wall at the TA side. Is it the TA that's pushing them to adapt the secant pile wall? If it is, I would like to get correspondences from the TA saying that they are not accepting something else other than the secant pile wall? Because my understanding is they have a very technical staff over there. I did interact with them tons of times, and they understand what they are doing. I don't think they asked for a secant pile wall in this project. If they did, I would like to get a correspondence from them saying we're not accepting something else. And then we can buy that secant pile wall. Other than that, please change the secant pile wall to any other conventional SOE system. The other thing, I'm not sure why they are willing to excavate immediately adjacent to that tunnel. It could be a good idea if they leave just like 10 feet or so and then excavate. That would mitigate the impact on the tunnel. And by the way, and this is for the applicant and his engineers, I believe, and this is my professional opinion, I believe the worst option that could be done next to this tunnel is a secant pile wall. You want to minimize disturbance of the ground adjacent to this tunnel. So it's not that option that I would go with. The other thing that comes with the TA package or mandated by the TA tunnel is the Varandale truss. They are saying that they want to build at the higher floor, they want to build over that TA tunnel. So they want a cantilever above that tunnel. And the cantilever system they are using, it's called Varandale truss. And I did look at the documents they submitted, and they implying that this Varandale truss is very similar to, if somebody walks on the 59th Street bridge, the bridge is not just, it's not one deck, it's not one beam, it's one beam at the top, one beam at the bottom, and you can see diagonal elements, like really thick diagonal elements. We call this truss system. If you eliminate these diagonal elements and you just put vertical elements and rigidly connect them with the top and the bottom, we call this Varandale truss in the structural world. Usually the Varandale is a top tier or top chord, bottom chord, and vertical elements. The truss is top and bottom and diagonal and vertical. So the Varandale is not 10 chords and vertical elements. It's not like that. And I'm going to explain why they are going that route. But if you want to build a Varandale, it should be just like if you want to build it starting the second floor, it could be the beam from the second floor, the beam from the third floor, and then you strengthen these with two vertical or more elements, and then this is like your new mat foundation, the elevated mat foundation. And above this, you start building your building. You don't need to extend this all the way to the top of the building. You don't need to keep the shoring in place until you finish. It's ridiculous that structural engineers say we need to keep the shoring in place until we finish not the first floor, not the second floor, but the 12th floor. Why? If I'm gonna build that way, I would eliminate the Varandale thing, and instead of cantilevering 16 feet, I would cantilever just 8 feet and go with a regular cantilever. But I need explanation for why they want to keep that shoring for the entire construction period of that building. So this is the Varandale thing. And then on chapter 4, they are talking about the site slope. Yes, I looked at the survey and it sounds like the site has some slope, but they are trying to imply that the slope is across the entire site. If you look at the survey, and by the way, the survey we got is not legible. I couldn't read through the elevations, so I'm asking them to please provide us with a legible PDF of the survey. But looking at the survey, the slope of the site is not from the beginning like that to the end. It's like very gentle slope or like reasonable slope, and then during the past 30 or 40 feet of the site, it starts to be like really steep. So they are trying to imply that that slope issue is across the entire site. I believe based on what I saw from the survey, if I saw it right, it's not the entire site. It's just part of the rear of the site. So we need to get an updated copy of that survey.
That's it?
That's it.
Wow.
I had a question for
Yeah.
Commissioner Shetta.
Sure.
I may not be pronouncing this correctly, Ferndale Truss. You said, since that truss doesn't need to extend to the top of the building, the alternative to that is to not cantilever 16 feet, but go cantilever 8 feet and then remove the truss. But my question is, if they need to cantilever 16 feet to maximize the floor area, what is the alternative to a Ferndale truss that would be more cost-effective?
They could use the Verandil system,
Okay?
but the Verandil wouldn't be like 1 core, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12, and then tied with vertical elements. They could be just 1, 2, tied with vertical elements, as many as you can, and then this is your Verandil. It's just 10 feet high or whatever, 11 feet high. And this is your like mat foundation. I recall the first project I looked at after my graduation, and that was one of my professor's project. I went there and it was a cantilever like 4 meter, 4 times 3, that's like 15 feet cantilever. And that was like a really thick concrete slab, but on the first floor. It was, this guy used to call it elevated mat foundation. And sometimes here, even in US, they call them transfer girders. You could, if you have a building like this and you want to open concept, let's say on the first floor, and then on the second and above, you can put columns and do a residential or something. But for this floor, you want to go with an auditorium, let's say. You still could put on this floor, you could put columns on the perimeter and then put really thick slab on these columns. On top of this thick slab, you could put columns on top of this and go with like, and this slab acts like this is your mat foundation, but instead of supported by the ground, it's supported by the columns. So they could do that.
And would you then need thicker columns or so if you're containing it to a smaller vertical height as opposed to the construction costs and the material costs?
You know, a 16-foot cantilever is not an easy cantilever to design. And I'm sure the structural engineer is more than capable of designing something like that. My objection here is not, he's saying that I want to go with a 16-foot cantilever. It's up to him. But my objection is, if you want to go with a cantilever like this and you want to build a verandil, why do you believe that this verandil need to extend to the 12th floor? Even if you want to extend it to the 12th floor, I'm okay with that. But do not extend, do not keep the shoring from the 1st to the 12th without removal, because this adds cost to the project. And if you want to do it without adding the cost, be my guest. Go and do it.
But don't include it in our...
Exactly.
Yeah, right, okay. So, question though, so our question at the last hearing was, it seems like your cantilever is costing all this money, and that the project, and because, you know, it's a variance, so we're looking at what can you do and still make money out of a project, right? So there's no requirement that they, A, use all the floor area, and by the way, they're asking for a bonus of 2 times the floor area, right? So no way that they would not be able to, as of right, use up their floor area. By the way, there's approved drawings at the Department of Buildings for an 8-story building on that site. So, but the question is, what if you didn't have any cantilever over the tunnel, you avoided the cost of the truss, et cetera, why wouldn't that reduce the project cost significantly? That was the question that was posed to them
Right.
months ago.
I believe there are 2 elements. If they are eliminated from this project, it would be like a very regular project. The first one is the secant pile wall. The unit price for the secant pile wall is $300 per linear foot, I guess, if I recall the number. The soldier pile wall could be like $50, 6 times. And it's a significant cost item, and I'm not sure if it's needed. Like I said, if the TA asked it, if I'm the geotechnical engineer for that job and the TA asked me for something like that, I would go fight them, convince them that this is not needed, because it's not just it's not just the submission to the board, it's cost that this client, this owner will accrue without reason. So I'm not sure why seek and pile wall. Seek and pile wall is needed to cut off water, period, and to retain earth. Earth could be retained with many other systems like soldier pile and lagging, like soil clearing, like contiguous piles, too many systems. If the only reason you want to use seek and pile wall is to cut off the water, to prevent the water from going into the excavation, and we use this and we pay for the premium for that seek and pile wall for a reason. If we have a contaminated site and we're digging underwater, you want to minimize every single drop of water that gets into the excavation. So if you allow the water to get in, it's not just dewatering, it's a dewatering for contaminated water that you will need to put in drums and dispose at a cost. So this is huge money. So if you're paying this, you differentiate between this kind of cost and the cost of the seek and pile wall, I would elect to go with the seek and pile wall if it's the only viable option. But on a site like this, I didn't see that they have a problem with the groundwater. I wasn't able to find the groundwater table in the borings, so it sounds like water table is really deep. And even if they have groundwater table at grade, you're telling me that on other sides of this project, you're using soldier pile and lagging. So you're already allowing water to seep in. So it's seek and pile wall is not needed. And again, it's not the best. I'm saying this to the TA. It's, in my opinion, it's not the best option to go with adjacent to a tunnel like this, because seek and pile is a continuous excavation adjacent to the tunnel. Soldier pile and lagging, it's you drill one here and then you drill one 6 feet or 8 feet away, so it's less excavation, less soil disturbance. So it's a better system in my opinion.
Okay. And then with respect to the cantilever, you said there were two things that you think could make it a normal project.
Yes, the cantilever, like I said, the cantilever, if they want to cantilever less, or if they still want to cantilever the 16 feet, they could go with something else other than the verandil, or they still could go with the verandil, but just...
Right, but the question isn't if they want to. The question is, because for us it's a variance, right? And the argument is, the reason that this site is not a buildable site as of right is because of the tunnel, the sites, the irregularity of the site, and the tunnel, which is affecting two things, the secants and the cantilever. And we're saying, well, what if you just didn't build on the tunnel? Then you would eliminate totally the cantilever.
Or build partially. If the tunnel is occupying 16 feet, if you can minimize that 16 feet, instead of 16, go with 8. So it's not like you're cantilevering all the way to the property line. Cantilever midway between the two edges of the tunnel. This cantilever, the 8 feet cantilever, would be like very reasonable to build conventionally without increased cost. And in the meantime, it's going to give you some floor area. So I believe it's a viable option, but it's up to them.
Yeah, okay. So we see 8-foot cantilevers all the time. It's like, those are super standard. When you're buying air rights from the neighboring property, the neighboring property also gives an easement so that you can cantilever over it. And we see 8-10-foot cantilevers, like, really, they're sort of standard things in the city. And they don't come to the board to get a variance. So by way of example, that project that is here for the vesting is cantilevering in two directions, and they're 10-foot cantilevers, and they're not coming here for a variance.
Yeah, cantilevers are like very common in the city, and people do them all the time, but it's an item that they would like to utilize to get some additional floor area.
Right.
And we're just asking them if they want to eliminate it, that's fine. If they want to go with it, do it reasonably, and we'll look at the cost. And that's why we're asking for the details for the cost items and the quantity surveys.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Item number 14, 111-15BZ, 98 3rd Avenue, Brooklyn. They requested an adjournment.
Correct.
Item number 15, 2016-4467BZ, 69-25 Astoria Boulevard, Queens.
Okay. So there's a very substantial submission that responds to many of our questions and which provided plans for many different potential development scenarios, which I looked at, and I'm sure Commissioner Otley Brown reviewed a lot of the financials on. The one scenario, though, that isn't considered among all of those is the one that's described at the bottom of the 2015 lease summary for the lease that pertains to the portion of the existing sign that encroaches on the adjoining property behind at Lot 47. That summary states that if the variance it's aware that there's a problem with the zoning, and it's aware that there's a variance application in process. And it states that if the variance application is unsuccessful, the sign will be modified, quote, for business accessory use, unquote, which I assume is either for the diner, who's probably mowing the lawn underneath that site right now, because it reads as if it's on the diner's property, or for the building supply company next door. And the other thing that it suggests is it could be used for also or for telecom purposes. So neither of those uses were considered, and obviously there'd be a lot less work to be done to enable those. For telecom, I guess you just put up the
tower.
The tower, or you can even attach right to the sign structure. You wouldn't, because right now they're having to modify the sign structure by removing 2 vertical supports that are sitting on the neighbor's property. When I look at that, I'm just like, that's a total restructuring of the sign. I don't think you can just go with a Sawzall and cut it all off. It might be, you might need to rebuild the entire sign, kind of armature framing everything in order to do that. And if it was telecom, you just like stick up the antenna and you're done, arguably, if they're high enough or whatever it is you do with them, right? So that was never figured. There's almost no cost associated with that. And so far I'm seeing there's no need to do all that construction, like a 3-story house or a 2-story commercial, whatever. You just use it for the diner that pays you rent, and you also use it for telecom. And I don't know whether you note what Commissioner Otley Brown noticed, that there was an income reported on those leases for last year, for 2016, which I don't know if is consistent with the financials, which was $238,000 for the year.
For both sites?
For the sign. For one sign. So this one was referring to the sign that is being, for which a lease to extend onto the neighbor's property is being negotiated. So it's their way of justifying that they have some additional costs with this sign, saying, we made this much money on the sign, but we have this $10,000 lease, which he succeeded in reducing to $5,000 with those neighbors. So,
no, I didn't look at that. I looked at their own sheet of the list of income per year, and that they really wanted to base everything on this last year, which is a partial year and a year when the legality was in question. And so I didn't want us to rest anything on that. Because previous years behind, they were accepting as much as $200,000 a year versus the 50 and 50. And so therefore, I would really want to pay attention to the 50-50. And certainly the $200,000 per year has got growth since 5 years ago. So
that little cover letter says, just to let you guys know, my managers know, we made $238,000 last year on this sign. So the lease that I negotiated with the neighbors only cuts in $10,000. Right. So and what else? Yeah. Those were my comments.
Why didn't you do the financial item maneuver?
Okay, all right. So, looking at the other scenarios that they gave us, all you have to do really is look at the plans to see that those aren't going to be feasible, and it's going to be an awful lot of construction for which you're not getting enough money. So I really wasn't seriously considering them. And I did not see the letter that said that they could, as of right, either use it as an accessory business sign or use it as a cell tower. Otherwise, that would have changed my view on whether or not they satisfied the B. So looking at the as-of-right scenarios, without taking into account what you said, I felt they satisfied the B. However, they did not satisfy E. And really, the conversation is about the cap rate. And to me, there is no justification whatsoever for them to use a cap rate of 16. It's just, it's not suggested in any way, shape, or form. They talk about the sign's value being based on an aggregate of things: location, size, placement, height, viewing angles, but they left out viewership. They left out the amount of people that are trafficking by this site. And that actually contributes to the sign's value. It also contributes to the market risk of the sign, of which there is none at this site. I just want to show you a difference about what happens when you vary the cap rate, basically. If you, let me just find my, okay, if you have a net operating income of $45,000 and you divide it by a cap rate of 3%, which is the low end of what realty rates suggests, you get a value of about $1.5 million. And I would argue that the cap rate used here should be closer to 3%, because Realty Rates is actually a national database, and New York City is probably the best place for any kind of investment, certainly for signs. Now, if you use what they used, a cap rate of 16%, and you have the same net operating income and divide it by a cap rate of 16%, you get a value of $284,000. So there's a real large difference between what you can get. Now, if you use the value of around 1.2 million to 1.5 million and set it against the cost at this site, which is nothing, I mean, the land was like $94,000, you could see that the delta, or the difference between the cost and the value, is like 15 times the value, nowhere near being at a minimum variance. And what I thought was interesting was we had asked them to give us a scenario based on only one facing sign, and they did not do that at all. So to me, they just want all or nothing. You know.
Yes, I agree with Commissioner Brown. I think last time we had asked them to look at one sign. And again, I agree with Commissioner Brown with regards to the A finding, is that, yes, that given what they have shown so far, not counting the alternative and the telecom, you know, it seems like any construction of that sort may not be viable.
No, A. She's saying.
I'm saying the size of the site may not lend itself to a reasonable development and thereby a reasonable return.
Gotcha.
Without knowing the telecom and the one sign matter, the other bit.
No, the accessory business sign.
The accessory business sign, yeah. And that leads me to the neighborhood character. They provided this, the applicant provided a sign visibility study. I'm not quite sure what it analyzed, but what it did analyze, it seems it only analyzed the sign facing east and not west. It showed the distance of the sign facing east to the apartment windows, but not to the sign facing west. And that would have, and just using not a very conservative assessment, it would affect lots 47, which abuts the subject lot, the adjacent lot 2, specifically the side windows, lot 3, its rear windows, lot 4, rear windows, 5 and 7, their rear windows. The sign would be visible to these. And the applicant uses the term indirect view. I'm not sure what that means. Indirect, I mean, the sign would be directly visible.
Yes.
And
I think one of them was an oblique angle to the, you know, they did this something where there was a line of sight. That's an oblique angle, but the others can read the ad.
Yeah.
Right?
So that is a question I had, and what they meant by indirect view from the surrounding residential property. In my opinion, they're indirect view, except for the one building which has that sideline, and that will have an oblique view and maybe therefore indirect. And the applicant has provided a comparison chart with regards to the south conduit. I think there's a flaw in this analysis. In case of the south conduit sign, it is oriented away from the building. It is facing south conduit. It does not have any sign in the back. And the distance from the sign to the residential buildings, while is less compared to the subject side, in this case, they are visible. They can see the signs. So that analysis is missed in this comparison. And therefore, I don't think it meets a neighborhood character analysis yet, and has not responded to our question, and therefore raises the question, is it a minimal? Bring in the information what Commissioner Brown provided.
I agree with Vice Chair on the visibility of the sign at Conduit, because you are right, it is single facing and it's going in the westerly direction. And not only is it not facing the homes behind it, but there is a lot of tree cover over there that the board prior to this one ensured was in place.
And in this case, it probably, there isn't enough ground to have that kind of foliage to even cover it.
No, there
So-
isn't, yeah.
Unless they enter into another lease with the neighbors behind Lot 47, and they forest the place.
Right.
But actually, that doesn't really work, because that lot behind isn't directly behind this way, it's behind in that angle. So it actually wouldn't shield the people who have direct views of the sign. So then they need to make a deal with the neighbor on the other side. Okay.
Chair, I'm just wondering, the letter regarding if the variance is not granted, where did you?
So that was in, I need to go back to, it was in, there were many attachments. It was on the last submission, and it was
Okay.
about the leases.
Oh, the advertising
Yeah, so-
contract document?
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
that's
So
what
it's
I-
all the
I thought it
leases,
clarified.
and then it's just the manager of the signs explaining the history of the sign. That's what they do to justify continuing to hold this asset. You know, that's what they always do. So.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify, I was not talking. Thank you.
Thank you, okay.
Move on.
16, yeah.
Item number 16, 2017-39BZ, 271 Church Street, Manhattan. It's adjourned.
Adjourned, yeah.
Item number 17, 2017-100BZ, 412 East 98th Street, Manhattan. This is the Spence School.
Right. I think we just had open environmental issues on this,
Yeah.
and I don't know whether we're done.
We received an email saying that DOT has no issues, but I'm trying to get a formal sign off today.
And how about we had DEP air quality?
We received the sign off.
Okay. Great, thanks.
So, yeah, we would just, if the applicant could just prepare the final EAS with all the sign offs and be ready, if we can add one more
Okay.
DOT.
So that we do need them to update the final EAS. Okay. DEP signed off. Okay. All right, thanks.
Yep. Item number 18, 2017-205BZ, 555 Narrowed Avenue, the Bronx. And item number 19, 2017-206BZ, 4449 Bronx Boulevard, the Bronx.
I think, again, we had open environmental, so they submitted on March 16th. I guess we're still waiting for DEP to review.
Yes, we have all the submissions for air quality and noise. DEP is reviewing them. Hopefully a promised date of April 16th is what they gave us. The hazmat has been satisfied. We don't need an E designation. They're going to allow the condition that they do the testing once the windows are installed.
Good. Okay, we were also, though, expecting revised plans to indicate that the easement area link between the parking lot and the building is not part of the action, and I didn't see revised
It was
plans.
submitted late, but they are in,
Okay.
and the paper plans are prepared.
Okay, good.
This one too.
Okay.
Almost done. New cases, item number 1, 7715BZ, 24436 85th Avenue, Queens.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials, but proof of notice of hearing may be defective, as there's no attached proofs of mailing to the necessary parties. Instead, there's an address list that was notarized in 2015, so it's basically, yeah. So we need to check that, and if they can give us the proof of mailing, because I think that they misunderstood what they're supposed to be attaching. We also don't have the community board recommendation.
They do.
Oh, we have it? Okay, so, okay.
Community board
Just want to know,
disapproves.
it's disapproved? Oh. Disapproves, thanks. Okay. Disapproves. Okay, request that the board reject this enlargement of a two-family house in excess of its currently grandfathered size and shape. Applicant did not present any factual information that would support hardship about it, citing only the desire to increase market value. Okay. This is a very modest application requesting only a 376 square foot enlargement of an existing non-conforming two-family home. However, we do need to make an A finding, so I need a little help with this. The house is arguably obsolete in that it is an outdated two-family in a one-family neighborhood with an undersized unit at the second floor. So the obvious question is, why not just turn the house into a one-family, which would be a conforming building, and then you can make the enlargement as of right. So, and even if they wanted to come to the board, get a 10% increase under, I forget what special permit that is. but-
621?
Yeah, 621, right. So they could even go a little larger. They're here already, they could just do that, right? The response seems to be, to those questions, seems to be that such an effort would be costly to convert it into a one-family, because the kitchens would have to be removed and reworked and all of that, or otherwise modified, but and even though there isn't any financial support for that argument, it's just a statement in their statement of facts. But meanwhile, you look at the floor plans, and it's a gut renovation of the entire house. They're moving the kitchen from one side of the house to the other, they're adding 2 baths on both floors, so, and they're raising the roof in order to accommodate the addition on the second floor. So it's basically an enormous renovation of this existing, very costly renovation of this house. So, and there was no financial analysis provided for the B finding because the board has this tradition. I don't even really know where the tradition comes from. We've been looking, actually, where does the tradition come from? That there's no B finding on these cases, and we look at, you know, the have something to do with meeting minimum needs for modern living or something. I wish we could search back and know what the parameters are for that. But as a single-family house, it's a very viable property, so, I don't know, it's not undersized as a single family.
Right, well, my big question about it is, it may be unique in that it's one of two families in the neighborhood, but why is that a hardship?
Right.
That's the big question. I mean, you could be unique and it's not a hardship, and I don't think they've proven the fact that that's a hardship. To me, hey, you could have extra family members
Right.
living sort of apart. Actually, my cousin has that exact situation where he kicked his oldest son upstairs. So you don't want to deal with your dirt, you know, and he has his own little apartment up there with a kitchen and a bathroom. Same entrance and exit. So I think they actually have to do the second half of A, which is, this is unique, but this is unique. That is a hardship that other homes in the area don't have.
Right, right. And by the way, if you're kicking your son upstairs, but you don't want your son to have such a nice apartment, then you kick your son upstairs to a little studio, and you take the other half and you add a bedroom and a separate staircase, or make yours like a little duplexy thing, and he's got his little studio to invite his friends.
What a mean mother you are.
Just saying, well, because one of the arguments is it's
Let
too
the record
small.
state, Chair is not recommending that.
Right, but the argument was, oh, I can't expand my house. Well, yeah, you could, and like you said, it's a great advantage to be able to have your kid living with you, but not living with you.
Right.
So you don't have to do the laundry, and you don't have to cook the meals if you don't want. Okay. Okay,
Move on.
yeah.
Item
Does
number
anybody,
2.
I don't know, does anyone else have?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Item number 2, 2016-4472BZ, 24501, 24513 Jamaica Avenue, Queens. This is a physical culture establishment.
Right. So I didn't actually find proof of service of the initial application, and I didn't find the community board's actual recommendation, but they obviously reviewed it because they sent a cover letter.
You can look in there?
So they sent a cover letter that says our resolution is attached, but it's not attached.
It might be
Okay.
like it's a double-sided document.
Yeah, that could be. All
right, we'll look.
It might have been just photocopied
I'll
on
look.
one side. Okay. We do have one letter in support. Again, this is a relatively minor request to allow a PCE to continue operations after a lapsed 7336 special permit.
Wait, I'm sorry. This is,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, this is the physical culture, but it's a 7221.
Yeah, okay.
Because there was a lapse and a subsequent zoning change, that
Okay.
means the special permit's not available.
Yeah,
So,
all right,
again,
so
I'm
let's take a look
having
at the
some
file.
trouble with the A finding in the materials. It's not that I couldn't invent an A finding, but I don't find them in the materials. The rezoning did not render the retail use non-conforming. It only rendered the ability to apply for this special permit non-conforming, inapplicable. So I don't know what the uniqueness is. The cases cited, and there are many cases cited, I thought are all distinguishable from this one, where most of the buildings were built for manufacturing uses in our districts, were obsolete for such uses, and the space remained vacant until rented to a PCE, or it was a split lot where, what do? It's PCE, and there's a little bit of an R district there, and how do you get to it, right? So I'm wondering, also, is this a hardship to the owner of the building or to the operator of the fitness center, or a future tenant who would be responsible for the build-out? Doesn't the owner just have to deliver a plain vanilla box?
That is my
Right?
question.
And who's typically responsible for demolition in a retail lease? And sometimes the owner says, I'll give you a build-out letter, which they say they use is $25 a square foot. And, it's plain vanilla box, so $25 is plenty to give the guys with a sledgehammer to get all that stuff out of there. And so it's more than enough. And then you can put up the sheetrock, and arguably $25 is enough for that. The statement of fact states that a big box retailer wouldn't find the cellar useful due to absence of a loading dock. I don't know where the support is for that. Most of our buildings don't have loading docks.
They approved it.
Right.
And why couldn't the ground floor space be subdivided to provide smaller retail if that is the standard, which they said that's the standard, that this is too big of a retail space?
But they don't really provide that much backup other than right there on the block.
Right.
I think the only argument they made was that this site, this one is one of the largest one of all the other in the neighborhood, and the only other large one is a bank, it was a standalone one. And typically, most of the retail uses are of smaller nature, and spacing this out, what it lends itself, because it's an L-shaped, that space.
That faces the side
The
street.
space of the side renders it's not so valuable because it's facing a residential street frontage and not a desirable space for retail use. So having that as a continuous retail space with a retail space fronting on Jamaica is one of the arguments, at least
Right.
what I gathered from the text.
But they could, for instance, if you accepted the idea, which I'm not sure I accept, that the side street isn't a viable retail use, then you could divide it into two spaces where you have an L-shaped thing, which is pretty great for a restaurant, by the way, right? So a restaurant where you have back of the house that's really great because you can service the back of the house directly from the side street, and then the main part of the restaurant is the front. And then you have another retail space. But then if we look at just one street over, there's I forget what it is, there's an accountant's office or something like that that's on the side street. So that's a pretty typical thing you do with side streets, where it's not really walk-in traffic. It's more of those kinds of things, the plumbers, work supply or something like that. Those are more like magnet type functions. So I'm not sure about that. I looked at it as it has an advantage of being on a corner. But that's 246th Street that has that commercial use on the side street. And contrary to the claim in the statement of facts, the absence of parking at this pre-61 building does not seem to be an impediment to the other commercial uses in the same building, because unlike lots of what we're seeing in the city, all of the shops are rented. So something's right about this location, that you have full occupancy. So it seems that the main argument for this type of use in buildings with cellars, so they're citing to lots of other buildings, is that it's a building with cellar and that there's little marketable use for cellar most of the time. So, you get things like Duane Reads that don't care much about having a street presence. They just have an access, and then you go down into the cellar, which is where everything goes on, like we have next door to our office, right? Or there are other kinds of functions where there's a retail presence on the ground floor, just enough to get you in, and then the rest is in the cellar. But it's PCEs that they don't care, they don't need light. So it's mostly that PCEs create an opportunity for rental of a cellar, but it doesn't look like they're allowing for an increase in value where you're really using the cellar. It's not a place to put your boxes, it's a place to have your business. So it seems like the rent should go up if you can provide a cellar with a retail front to get you off the street. And also in this project, there's no ADA access to the cellar, and they said, that's because the project was built in 1994. Local Law 58, the ADA requirements, is 1987 or 89.
Yeah.
And so they were required to have ADA access. So I don't know how they didn't do that.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to add something about the uniqueness finding, because to me, what's interesting is usually the special permit is, the purview of the PCE, but the variance is the purview of the landowner. And that's kind of key when you look at this, because the landowner has to prove that there is a unique hardship here, not the PCE, and it has nothing to do with the programmatic needs of the PCE. So the question here is it unique that a landowner has a building that is subdivided, unfortunately for them, in a way that is not allowing them to maximize their rent here because of what happened with having to vacate one of their premises? And how is that any different from any other landowner who has a strip of retail stores where somebody vacates and that leaves you with an oddly shaped box?
Right.
And why is that a hardship here? And, why is this something that the BSA has to help them to be made whole, when we see that retailers everywhere are constantly rebuilding their space, subdividing and merging different units as need be in response to the market? Why is it that in an area where usually you don't get extra income for the seller, why is it a hardship to not get extra income for the seller?
Right.
So I don't find an A finding yet here, and that's the problem.
That's really a good point, yeah.
Community Board approved. It's in the July 17th, July 7, 2017 submission.
Okay.
Yeah, it was double-sided.
Okay, it was, okay.
And so they parceled it at 2 pages, so.
Okay. Okay, yeah, okay. No, it's a very interesting point, and we have another case that we're currently considering where the big issue was, were we looking at the tenant's needs, or are we looking, as we should, at the property owner and their inability to make a return on their investment because of, in that case, clearly unique physical conditions about the site. So, yeah, no, it's really, okay. We also need, if, depending on how we go with this, fire department review of the existing sprinklers and the fire alarm system, which wasn't connected to a central station. They have a proposal to have that work done.
I think the fire department did send a letter, and the applicant will be able to address that tomorrow and then make a subsequent submission, I think. Yeah.
But, we're still struggling with getting past A, right? So I'm not sure if Commissioner Otley Brown wanted to talk about financials. Did you
I could just quickly go over my financial questions should we get to that point. For the site value, they're using 2014 buildings, adjusted upwards by 3% for time. And first of all, that's old. It's 4 years ago. And second of all, the fifth comp, which actually also sold in May 2014, doesn't have an adjustment for time. So I would love for them to find some more recent comparables. For retail leases, I really need to see the rent-up matrix for the as-of-right and the proposed with the storefront size. And what I would love to see is the size and square footage for each one of those spots with the rental square footage attributed to each, because it seems as if the rent for that one side store is really dragging down the average in the proposed, so that it almost is working out to less than it should. So I just want to see it for each of the scenarios, just to see what they're attributing to that back store and how it actually turns everything around.
Also, they showed on the analysis that they have 2 vacant stores, but the Taekwondo is still operating. So it's not vacant. I went on their website. You can still sign your kid up for classes.
Yeah.
So.
Now, in the proposed with the PCE, they're using the current PCE lease, and we usually don't use actual information. So I think they need to just show it based on comparables. And I think it's the existing $32 a square foot, maybe adjusted downward for size because it's a larger size. The cap rates, there's a difference between the as-of-right at 6.6% and the proposed at 6.3%. And I think the difficulty in leasing should be expressed more in the vacancy rate and not the cap rate, because this is a retail building located on a major commercial strip, and there is no risk here. Certainly no risk that is particular to the existing versus the proposed. The vacancy rate is 3% for each scenario. That's on the converse of the argument. So if the whole argument is that the as-of-right stores would be harder to lease up and risky, why aren't you varying the vacancy rate? And that's where you show the difficulty in the leasing. So that's basically if we should get there. And then another thought I just generally had, and I'll just read it so that I don't have to collect my thoughts because I know this is taking a long time. Basically, the PCE costs less money since it's actually already in place. However, it is a legalization, so shouldn't there be construction costs to bring the PCE space that exists in the proposed to fruition rather than the as-of-right having construction costs to return it to an as-of-right condition? We should be starting, our baseline should be the as-of-right. And it seems like in the financials, it's actually done in the reverse. So the as-of-right should be the baseline with no additional construction costs, right? And then the proposed should have the construction costs to create a PCE in it. And if you did it that way, the financials do not work. Because it's actually where you throw the development costs that actually screw up the analysis.
Right. That's, yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. So the other question that I had, but maybe it wasn't, I wasn't understanding it. There was the analysis is of an existing building with 3 vacant stores and soft costs of $500,000, when the construction cost was $500,000.
Right. And their argument is that a lot of those costs are static costs and not percentages, and so that's why when the hard construction costs are low, they look like they're high in relationship to. We see that a lot of times when they're just talking about renovations, because there's certain things that are just hard fixed costs that aren't related to the amount of construction being done. So it's like the leasing is really, the leasing costs are based on the amount of money you're leasing your spaces for. It doesn't really have to do with how much money you're putting into the construction.
But some of them are like soil borings, engineering reports. You don't have those in a renovation of a retail space. So I think there's too much sort of pro forma assumptions. This is an interior renovation. There's no new construction.
Right, where
here.
they're like just taking whatever allowable percentages they can take.
And they're delivering a vanilla box in the as of right. So all we're talking about is demo, right? And a little bit of electrical in case it doesn't meet code.
Right, but then we go back to what I just said, which is that the as-of-right should have none of that in that, because that PC isn't supposed to be in there. So we shouldn't even be talking about demoing and ripping up anything to get a PC out that shouldn't even be there in the first place. That's the whole point. And if you take all of those costs out, the as-of-right works. And if you put all those costs into the proposed, which is what it would be to build out the space for a PCE, then the proposed doesn't work.
Right, I see. Okay.
Ready? Item number 3, 2017-31BZ, 107-17, 34th Avenue, Queens.
Okay. We have proof of service of initial application to officials and proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board 3 recommends approval on condition, which is, here we go. To move trees located in the driveway. Parking challenges may incur if trees are kept at their present location. To widen the curb cut to ensure that parking can be done safely. The cellar shall not be used as an additional rental unit / illegal occupancy. They should ensure proper drainage in the parking area. Exterior security lighting needs to be placed in a manner that will not be an obstruction to neighboring properties. These are now my comments. They need to establish that the lot was not held in common ownership with any neighbors. I think it's kind of odd that it remained completely vacant since 1914, so I thought it was fair to assume that it was used by an adjoining owner at some point. Because this is Queens, I wasn't able to find any common names, though, when I did a quick look on Acris, so it's kind of a mystery to me about this. It did have a illegal sign on the site for a long time. So they need to do a title search for the historical tax lot numbers 23, 25, 28, and 29, and compare those names to the subject lot 27. It isn't clear from the stack of deeds provided that that was done, and the statement of facts doesn't mention adjoining properties. The uniqueness study shows no vacant narrow corner lots within the study area, and all corner lots developed pre-61 or the result of mergers with adjoining lots. The front yard study shows the requested 5-foot yard is typical of the area, especially on corner lots, and that side yard widths are also really wildly varied. I'd like to see an elevation of the street to show the compatibility of the built form with neighborhood character. Either that or do an aerial and give us some heights. I know just from looking at a Google Earth image that there's a similarly sized and formed building diagonally across 34th Avenue. It's also pretty skinny and tall, so.
Yeah, but they didn't address.
Yes, so those were my comments. I didn't have.
Show the chain. I had a comment, and it's a question is, do they need a variance also for the side yard? For section 23-461A.
You're asking for one.
5-foot minimum is required for each side totaling
No, I
13.
think they
are asking
They
for-
are asking for side yard waiver. They're asking for side and front yard waiver.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm
You're in the other
confusing
one.
it with the other one. No, on this one, the requirement allows for a 5-foot minimum, and they are saying requirement is 8 feet. What I'm getting at is that even if they were to provide a 5-foot side yard, I think the floor plate would still not be wide enough to make it marketable. That was just a comment.
Oh, so then it
you're
would be like 10 feet wide
Right,
instead
yeah.
instead of 7 feet.
Oh, so you think it's a 5-foot side yard?
Yeah, instead of 8 that they have used, but
okay.
even with the 5 foot,
So they
it
just
does
need to
not.
correct.
It's a correction they need to make. This is what happens when you're reviewing too many
I
things.
know.
They superimpose one note over the other.
5-foot side
It still
yard is
doesn't
actually
address the
required.
floor plate size.
Yes.
And and this goes to the same thing, like their rear yard, which is one of the side yard, can be 20 feet, they're providing 30 feet. Again, by maintaining that 20 feet, the floor plate increases by 10 foot, but it doesn't lend itself to anything, so they just need to clean up those things.
It's basically, on the interior, it's like an 8-foot
Yeah.
wide house.
Yeah,
So with no,
just a little bit of cleanup.
With a-
I really had no issues.
yeah, yes. 8-foot wide house, 3-foot wide staircase gives you, 5 feet of where to put the dining room table. Okay.
Item number 4, 2017-256BZ, 666 Greenwich Street, Manhattan.
Ed. So this is yet a new form of how we exercise. We are on TV when we exercise. So we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. And in this case, exercising huge caution, they also notified all the tenants in the building. Community Board 2 recommends approval. We have a certificate of no effect from Landmarks Commission, and my only comment was that they include the acoustical details in the set. And then there's a written description of the acoustical work in the statement of facts, which does appear in enormous detail on the plans. Oftentimes, it's in the statement of facts, and we don't see it on the plans, but they're being super careful here. So there are these 2 exercise rooms that are rooms within rooms, and, they're very concerned about the transmission of vibration, so I think this is a good sort of role model project. Anybody else?
Item number 5, 2017-259BZ, 1760 East 28th Street, Brooklyn. It's a single-family home enlargement.
We have proof of service of initial application to officials and notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board 15 recommended approval with 30 in favor and 8 opposed. We have 15 letters in support and 1 letter opposing it from the neighbor who's located to the immediate rear, citing the impact that the project will have on drainage and shadows that an increase in lot coverage will have on his property. There's a semi-detached building, this is a semi-detached building, and happily, in terms of the mass of the semi-detached building, the scope of the enlargement proposed is entirely at the rear, so we don't have to deal with what it does to the shape of the building that's visible from the street. However, the proposed enlargement in terms of floor area exceeds the 1 FAR that we really use as kind of the cutoff point, so they really should bring that down. With respect to the proposed rear yard incursion, the rear yard study shows that this block and the houses to the rear of the site, including the one from the opposition, are characterized by 23-foot rear yards. There's no information on how many stories those incursions extend, except that you can see from Google Earth that they go straight up, because these are houses built in like the 40s. Yard dimensions and heights, though, should be verified, because we're relying on that in the field and provided, so making sure that we're talking about 23 feet to the immediate rear. The anomalies are actually the complying rear yards. And the only thing is, there's a house immediately adjacent to this one that is immediately adjacent to a prior board grant that allowed a 2-story addition to go to 20 feet. So the thing that's very sad about this, because the way the board has been operating is, if you've got it already behind you and next to you, you get to do it again. In this case, we'd be boxing in that neighbor where they have a lush backyard, and I think all their trees will die, right? So, I mean, because basically, unless I am missing which way the sun is traveling, because I might be. But basically, they have like a 37-foot rear yard that's heavily landscaped, and this will pull the building forward so that they basically only have 20 feet that's exposed to the light. And so I'm quite concerned about that, which is why I'd say we should apply the same kind of approach on this one, where fine to the 20 feet on the first floor, where they have this very generous kitchen, seating, whatever, rec area, and then on the upper floor, which is just is a master bedroom suite, they pull that back 5 feet, so it just gives more opportunity for light to penetrate to the neighbor who's going to be boxed in. And the proposed lot coverage also at 53% is actually really high based on the study area information, and even based on the information about the prior BSA grants. It may be because this is I don't know, because this house was built large on its site to begin with, because it's over 0.5 FAR already. According to the study, the permitted coverage is more like in the 40-something%, with the exception of the one house that's 2 doors away that was the subject of a grant, which is also 53%. But that's on a lot that's not a normal shape. It's a chamfered lot, so the size of the same size house covers more of its smaller lot. Anyway, those are my comments.
So now I'm at the right project. So I had a question is, if they, do they not also need a side yard waiver? Because per zoning resolution section 23461B, one side yard of 8 foot wide is required in an R32 district, while this has a legally non-complying rear yard width of 4'6", which is being extended into the rear. Isn't that an additional objection typically we have seen on these projects being added? That's just a question I had. This is just an extension of the legally non-complying yard into the
Side
rear.
yard, right.
Into the side yard, and typically I've seen that that's listed as one of the objections, because it's an extension, you have a legally non-compliant side yard.
So they should have a side yard objection, which you didn't see?
No.
Oh, well, sure, they need that. That's what this is all about, this special permit.
Floor area, open space, lot coverage.
Yeah. No, but this special permit is specifically about extending illegal side yards.
Yeah,
right?
so, okay, so I'm not missing something.
Or non-complying side yards.
Right, because the waiver is for FAR, open space, lot coverage, rear yard, and perimeter wall height. They need to include the side yard.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, okay.
Teresa, look at.
Oops, okay.
I think that may have just been.
Yeah, I think. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay.
Heat on its noise. Item number 6, 2017-299BZ, 24202 61st Avenue, Queens.
Okay, so we have proof of service of initial applications to officials. We also have an affidavit of notice of hearing, but no proof of mailing received, which we should have. They filled out the affidavit. You have them?
No, they have it, but they didn't send it in yet.
So we need them.
They told me verbally that.
Okay, but we need them. Okay, so, yeah. Community Board recommended approval on condition with 18 in favor and 12 opposed. That's pretty close. Community Board said, under the stipulation that not a truck route signage be added to the entrances of the nearby Cross Island Parkway, Grand Central Parkway, Marathon Parkway, Douglaston, and Little Neck Parkways, not a...
Parkways are not for trucks.
That's why they want it there.
Yes, so the trucks
So the
can't
trucks
egress.
don't go on them.
Right, or like we heard today about a bus driver who didn't know he's not
Right.
supposed to drive on
And
Park
just
Road.
shave the whole top of the
Yeah,
bus off.
exactly. You didn't hear that?
With kids
Yeah.
coming
Kids,
home
kids,
from
kids.
a holiday.
Yeah, pretty. And he didn't know that there were commercial route signs.
They provided us, I'm sorry, they provided us also with newspaper notification.
Okay,
Newspaper
good.
notification. They emailed it this morning.
But those are those newspapers that, you really have to be wanting to read those notices. That's
The
somebody with a
Queen's
lot of
Courier.
time.
The Queen's Courier.
I read that.
You do the notices, the public notices?
Well, I go through everything that's there.
No, that's in here. I mean,
I read the local.
in your free time, do you go and read those pages at the back of the post where they have all those list public notices that someone is claiming some
The answer is
ownership of
yes.
something?
The answer is
Wow.
yes. When I'm interested in a particular project, I'm looking to see
Oh,
if they
that's
have
different.
voted,
Okay.
if they've applied for
Okay,
it.
that's different. Okay.
It's a fascinating newspaper.
Yeah, okay. This is an exceptionally detailed and carefully assembled application about an extremely complex assemblage of buildings on a complex site with a complicated business model. A case where all of my questions were answered for the most part as I read along. So I would write a question and then I'd delete it because a few paragraphs later they answered. That's fantastic. So thank you to Jella for helping them get there and them for being such good applicants. With 60 years of non-conforming conditions and variances, many variances on variances on variances on a 13-acre site, I'm just curious, this is just idle curiosity, why hasn't this property owner sought a rezoning for this 13-acre site? I mean, it seems like it's going to be there. The community probably finds it convenient that they have this shopping center there, and the siting of it is such that it's kind of sunken down, so you're really not aware of the site. And so, and maybe a rezoning would allow it to grow too much, and that's one of the reasons that they haven't rezoned. It's kind of very modest structure relative to the siting, but it just seems to me unfair to this owner that every single time they want to make a minor change, they have to come to the BSA for the slightest thing. I just find that
I think it's the Manhattan
Sad.
CB2 syndrome here.
the CB2 syndrome, okay, which has to do with not acknowledging that there's retail in Soho, yeah. Okay. So these are my questions now. So I'm just a bit confused by the stated amount of existing floor area versus the total proposed. The statement of fact states there are 312,660 square feet for an FAR of 0.55 on a 564,297 square foot lot, but the zoning calculation chart that's on the drawings shows only 174,964 square feet of existing floor area. And of course, if DOB accepts the subcellar and cellar levels as actually that, then those are gross floor area numbers and not zoning floor area. So the applicant really needs to qualify like that. What does DOB consider it? Because we might be talking about a, 0.1 FAR site, because there's really only one level above grade, right?
Only for parking, that becomes critical.
Right.
In the cellar and the sub.
Yeah, exactly. So then you're over providing for lots more parking, and you wouldn't need this waiver, et cetera, on the parking issue. Plus, I found there's an error on the existing floor area chart for the proposed. The math doesn't add up. So the ostensible reason for the Lowe's tenant to need additional floor area is due to the lower than 22-foot ceiling height and the absence of a 150-pound per square foot slab. So my question is, the proposed drawings show Lowe's occupying only the subcellar level, not the floor above, which must be a slab on grade condition. So it seems like then they could improve the bearing capacity of the slab easily enough. I don't know, not a specialist, but just guessing they could do that. And if the small retailers on the cellar level aren't considered good, really good quality tenants in the sense of, they're not what the market needs to see these days, then why not just take out that floor and make this a double height space, and then it's all Lowe's? Like we see, I'm not really familiar with Lowe's, but Home Depot or Bed Bath & Beyond, for example, those storage shelves on which you get all of the stuff, those things are unbelievably tall, right? If they have a 40-foot height space, they have storage shelves that are 40 feet high and contraptions that bring the stuff down, right? So, so I'm like, wouldn't they then therefore really like, I think it's a 37-foot high floor to ceiling if you removed that interstitial, that floor? So that's one question. Or remove part of that floor, and then they get the ceiling height that they need for whatever that section of selling is, and then they retain the smaller retail spaces on that floor above.
I had a question, especially now that Toys R Us is
Going out of business.
is
I
going out
thought
of
they
business.
just got financing.
Is it?
Maybe it was a
I thought they got
Chapter
bailed
11.
out. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so we don't know.
God help them if it does go out, because then they have to come back again.
Yeah. That was one of my questions.
Right.
And does it
Yeah.
affect this site? And if it does, then can it be used as a double height? for-
Right, same issue.
For the same.
Right. So, right. And then, I don't know whether I didn't find engineering information to support the claim that there's inadequate bearing capacity, so I don't know where they are.
I believe it was, I'm afraid that was a miscommunication between whoever wrote the statement of facts and whoever wrote the hardship or uniqueness report. From the language in the uniqueness report, I believe he was talking about, this is a retail, typically retails are designed for such and such, the warehouse requires much more. So his conclusion was most likely that the retail, the warehouse is not gonna is gonna be short in bearing capacity of that slab. But I'm not sure, this is just a guess, and they are saying that the warehouse require 300 PSF, pound per square foot of slab capacity. They are saying that the existing retail can just provide 75 to 100. And my question is there any structural evaluations of the existing slab? I saw some language about piles underlying subsurface soil. I'm not sure whether this is a pile support, what kind of subsurface there. If they have any subsurface information, I would ask them to give it to us. And if they have the structural design, I believe they do for the lowest floor slab, I would like to get it and look at it, see whether this slab can really take 75, 100, or 300. So we can either confirm that this is a hardship item or just exclude it.
Right, okay. Okay. And then I wanted them to provide, so just to help understand better the relationship of the floors to the site, and the same question about why can't you double height this floor, provide lateral and longitudinal sections through the subject building, because we never actually get a section through the building. Also, with respect to the elimination of the parking spaces, I see that the A and B areas of the extension for the Lowe's eliminate approximately 40 spaces, but I don't see how it's eliminating 101 spaces. So they need to clarify on the drawings how many existing spaces there are, which ones will be eliminated, provide parking counts on the rows. They actually never tell you how many in each row, because the plans are so tiny. So, right, so they're so tiny you can't actually put a number in a parking space, but you could say 8 spaces, 12 spaces, like that, and then total them. They should overlay the existing versus the proposed parking layout on the parking drawing. They should provide clear zoning calculations for the required parking based on the uses. For instance, this is a pre-61 building, so what were the regulations for parking at the time of the initial approval? And then there was additional parking required, for instance, for the subsequent enlargements for like Fairway, right? So, and that was also the case for the loading berths. So whatever the pre-61 requirements were, that's the base against which we can measure. And then, of course, the BSA, it may have, so that's where I'm not sure, where did the number that they now have on parking come from? The one that they're seeking to waive. And also, again, as we talked about, is that subcellar and cellar, is that floor area that is subject to parking requirements? The potential tenants expressed dissatisfaction. They have a list of the tenants who had looked at the space and had indicated it's not suitable for them. They expressed dissatisfaction with the amount of parking that's adjacent to the lower level. I'd like to understand if they know what would have been considered adequate parking amount at the lower level. The proposal here is to reduce the parking specifically at that level, which makes no sense to me, right? By nearly 100 spaces, so that contradicts the entire retail market concern. And you have the movie theater, you have those parking-dependent uses at that level who then might move out because now they've been deprived of 100 spaces of parking and might be thinking the same way as those potential tenants who said, this isn't working for me, I can't put a gym here because I need parking to be right there.
Yeah,
but then
also I don't want to say 100%, but I think I heard also the movie theater may be leaving.
right.
Yeah.
Well, actually, no, they said, but actually it's really funny, the photographs that they show, there's a sign on the movie theater that says, we're staying, we're not leaving, so who knows?
Yeah, that's why I said I don't know 100%.
Who knows, they may be in discussions with the landlord who's trying to get them out because they'd rather rent to Lowe's, for example. And that was another comment they made in the statement of facts, which isn't borne out by what's currently playing at the movie theater. So they said they were only showing B films, which I read as, those films with actors you've never heard of, that you go to because it's a cheap movie theater and you don't have anything to do and it's raining, but not that you go to see like Hollywood blockbusters like The Black Panther, which is currently playing there. So that's not really, unless you consider that a B-grade film, I just didn't really understand. No, that's what I mean. So these are Hollywood main title films.
And I thought they said the reason that they can't attract the A-line movies is because it doesn't have the appropriate seating, the stadium seating, and all of those things.
But that means you need to fix your movie theater. You're supposed to spend a little money on the joint every once in a while.
Right, but they can't do the stadium seating because they don't have the floor height.
Yes, okay, understood about that, right. So it isn't going to be one of those super mega Cineplex things like you would get in the suburbs, for example, right, where they start from scratch. And I also wondered in terms of this convenience to parking, they don't have an elevator that gets you to the upper deck. If you had,
I thought Fairway had to put in an
There is-
elevator.
Fairway
and
put in an
No, there is
elevator.
one here, right?
that takes you to the upper deck?
It goes, right, this,
No,
sorry,
that's
we're
the,
looking at the plan. This
that's Lowe's,
No, but from the Lowe's main entrance,
yeah.
there is an entrance from Lowe's. This elevator goes to all the
No,
floors above.
is that in the existing? I thought
Yes,
that.
it's
Oh, it
in
is?
the existing. It was difficult to find it, but
I also thought it was kind of ironic, the PCE guys say, we're not interested in putting a gym here because you have to go upstairs to the parking.
that's the
You
existing.
just run a treadmill for,
Additional.
an hour, and you don't want to climb a flight of stairs to go to your parking?
That's the
Free
existing.
exercise.
Anyway, and then in terms of the parking utilization, now I'm up to that part. The weekend study showed peak utilization rates in September with the Macy's space vacant at 511 parked cars, which exceeds actually what you can park on that lot. It's a 485 space lot. So that means there's people parking in the drive lanes and things like that. So then I'm really missing, I'm not understanding. So if that's the actual accumulation, and at the time that they measured, there were actually 511 parked cars, then there's an excessive demand for that level of parking when Macy's isn't in business. So it means that actually you can't afford to take away the 100 spaces, you actually need more spaces at that level.
And then Lowe's will be in business, so it could be more even, more
Exactly.
demand.
Exactly. And if people are like, I need to park where my front door is, then all of the pressure is on that level. And if anything, the addition should be on another level. It should be at the cellar level. So I don't actually know how Lowe's is using these things. It might be like garden supplies. I'm not really
Most
sure how
likely,
it's.
yeah.
So, but why couldn't you drive to another deck and find that's where the garden supplies are? Because you're loading them right into the back of your car, presumably, something like that. I don't.
I believe this is, I had a chance to build one Lowe's store, and that was in Bayonne, in New Jersey. And I believe Lowe's has like a typical layout for their store, and I guess that the eliminated parking will be the garden supply for Lowe's. The
Yeah.
layout, the typical layout for Lowe's is like that.
Right, but so that's why I wonder, why couldn't, because it's a specific type of function where signage could arguably say, if you're here to buy trees, drive to the second deck, and then they're eliminating parking where there's much less demand.
I think just transporting those huge trees to the second deck would be,
No, you're not, no, the trucks are, so those are being delivered however supplies get delivered to the second floor, right? The trees get there because that's how they're being delivered by the trucks. I'm talking about the people who go to buy. A consumer, you drive up to the second deck, and then you drive right to the shop that's located on the second deck, and then you just load into your car. The issue is, do you take away the spaces on the sub-cellar deck versus the spaces on the cellar deck? Because they're taking the spaces away from the sub-cellar deck. So my question is, why can't you just put those two other retail functions on the second floor? And it's not a difference in floor area, it's just where they're located.
I think this is, again, as Commissioner Shetta is saying, Lowe's has a very horizontal layout. They do
Yeah,
not
I-
have any vertical
I
layout.
believe they are very strict
And oftentimes,
with that,
people, when
yeah.
they go for shopping, they're not going exclusively for plant shopping. They're doing other things, and they'll pick up, oh, I need to do gardening. I'll pick up something here, something there.
Yeah.
And the trees might be upstairs, but all the other gardening support system, which can be enclosed in an area, may be downstairs. So separating it doesn't help.
So,
in
but
the
this is an
servicing.
issue, though, with the parking. If there's a demand with an empty store of 511 spaces during peak time, how can you justify taking away 100 spaces?
But didn't this report also indicate that the nature of parking utilization that is used for Macy's and nature parking utilization for Lowe's is very different, in the sense that the Lowe's tends to cater mostly to contractors and builders. So they are, it's not, and they generally try to come very early in the morning or off-peak, so they're not fighting with the traffic so that they can start the construction. So it's a slightly different flow of traffic, inflow and outflow, compared to someone who's going to go to Macy's for various kinds of shopping, primarily on weekends or after work.
But this study was done when Macy's was empty. So even if you said 30 people a day go to Lowe's to buy stuff by car, right? You're still short 100 spaces on a demand for 511 at that lower deck level, right? It'd be different if Lowe's were the only tenant. Like you take away and maybe the question is, where were all those people going during those peak times, right? So, I'm imagining the movie theater, so that was the other part of the question. When they were measuring it, they're arguing that the movie theater, they're using like standard rates for a movie theater in terms of parking utilization, but doesn't that matter what kind of a movie theater? So when they play the Black Panther, 100% of the seats are occupied, right? But when they play, a film that's just not happening, 40 seats are occupied, right? So depends on what those assumptions are based, right? Is it based on full occupancy of the theater? And is it based on the way this theater has, the way car drivers use this theater, right? are most theater goers, I would assume like Black Panther, you might have a full car, but or a children's show, you might have a full car. But in another kind of a show, it might just be 2 people in the car. And they're assuming like almost 4 in a car for the movies. So, I don't know. Like, because they're using the movie theater to deduct demand, right? That's why it matters. So, I think they need to clarify that more about how they reduce so much parking on that level. But the main thing is, I don't see where 100 spaces are coming from. I only found like 40 that are being eliminated by those 2 additions. They also need to provide backup on their parking utilization assumptions. They didn't provide any backup.
Oh,
They provided the charts.
We have some backup that we sent to DOT.
Okay.
You want to see it?
Yeah, because it helps understand. So they provide the charts, but then they don't show the calculations.
Okay.
And they don't show where they're getting their assumptions from. So yeah, we should always get the backup. And then and also, they give us the study from September and October, which is by level. But then the projections are by the entire parking garage. That doesn't make sense to me. That should also be by level. So they're projecting what it's going to be like once Lowe's moves in, the movie theater moves out. That should be by level. And then that's the next part of it again. I'm not sure that those enlargements are floor area because they're all happening at the cellar level, in which case this whole subject of parking is kind of moot.
Right, and I think from the plans and the section, it seems like they're not even fully enclosed. They're open, like the garden is going to be an open structure.
Right, yes.
And same thing with that specialty retail space, seasonal sales area, that seems like an open area. Generally what I've seen is they just put tents temporarily whenever something is going to happen. So it's not clear to me if they would count towards floor area, and from the plans it was not clear, and that was one of my comments, is that why are we counting it?
They also have this place near the truck dock. That is some kind of cage thing. I didn't get the impression that that's a floor area structure.
Right.
So they're being very conservative in their assumptions.
Which is good.
I think. Yeah, it's good, but
it
may be doing them a disservice because a lot of our applicants aren't conservative. They're, and so this is overestimating perhaps. And then with respect to the truck docks, I'd like to understand the reason for the configuration of the dock locations and the truck route. On the proposed drawings, they're eliminating, it looks like, the 2 docks that are next to the Toys R Us. So they should label the truck dock locations on the plans and indicate where they're being reconfigured. The existing drawings show also, in terms of traffic circulation, the existing drawings show trucks entering at the second set of curb cuts to the east on Douglaston, and then they're driving directly to the truck dock. So they don't travel much in the parking area. The proposed, though, shows the trucks entering at the first set of curb cuts on Douglaston, and then they drive around the entire parking lot, and they come around the Lowe's from the back. So I didn't understand that, because now you've got truck deliveries, and in this case, they're huge trucks, right? Driving around the entire parking lot, potentially in conflict with other kinds of traffic. Maybe all the deliveries happen.
They probably happen very early.
Yeah, they might, but sometimes they happen, there's a lot of traffic, there's lots of things that slow down a truck, and sometimes it doesn't deliver until 11 because it's been stuck in traffic for 3 hours, kind of thing. So I just don't really understand why they are rearranging the route. Also, where does the fairway, they don't show a truck dock, so I didn't understand where fairway unloads. And then in terms of the signage, because they're also asking for signage waivers, the existing signage drawing and photos don't include all of the signs on the property. For example, the photo of pylon sign number 1 doesn't include the fairway pylon. So they're only looking at the signs that have to do with this new use. They're not looking at all the signs, and we're looking also at a neighborhood character finding, because if you're looking at an expansion over what's allowed for the district, then then we're talking about potential visual pollution because there's too many signs. And the main entry location where they have that image doesn't include the areas of the existing signs for T-Mobile and the use adjacent. All of the existing, all right, I said that already. In terms of the impact, the proposed number 1 Lowe's entry sign is very visible from the residential neighborhood and would be seen in conjunction with the Fairway sign that's already up there and other signs. So they really need to address that in terms of neighborhood impact and maybe an idea about how to reduce the impact of that visibility on that one row of houses that really do face that entry. Like maybe they could plant street trees or something like that for those houses, something, I don't know, but as a way to reduce the impact of the signs. And with respect to the permitted amount of signage under the C1 district regulations, they should clarify how this was determined based on frontage and number of establishments. In the as-of-right version, since there would be more establishments, it seems like they would be allowed more signs. So actually, the as-of-right doesn't suffer the way a single establishment does. There's lower limits. And is the current signage, I'd like to know, in compliant with the terms of the prior grant? And is all of the signage described actually zoning regulated signage? Because a lot of it is probably not visible from a thoroughfare. So does it even meet the definition of a sign? That's correct, don't make. It's outside a building, but it also needs to be visible.
It says outside.
It says visible
outside
from outside of a building, even if you're still on the parking lot?
Outside.
Okay. Visible from outside of a building, even though, okay. Outside of a building, all right. Anyway, but some of the signs may not even be visible from much. Some of the signs are actually shown underneath the parking deck, right? I don't see that that's outside of a building. That's underneath the deck of parking, where you're in there with your car.
So in those cases, those may not get counted towards the total signage analysis because it's inside the structure, but anything that's on the periphery of the building.
That's different.
Will get counted towards the sign analysis, and then we should get the sign analysis for each one of those street frontages.
Right. Right. So, but I'm thinking they're counting the ones that are under the parking deck.
Yeah, and also like right when you're approaching, there would be signs saying to this store or go left to or go up to this store. So they're factoring in all those possible signage that they would require to reconfigure this.
Right.
And I think given that this is such a tortured history in terms of number of times it is before BSA, they're factoring in all the potential permutation combinations of signs they may need to attract a potential tenant, and they're factoring in the worst case. So this is like the worst case that we are going to see. I thought from the signage analysis and their argument, it was very justified. I know that site, it is not at all visible unless somebody tells you that's a shopping complex. It's totally buried.
It needs wayfaring. It really does. It's horrible, even with the signage that's there. Just knowing which one of those 3 entrances you really need to enter to get where you want to go.
Exactly.
It's like crazy.
Right. Yeah. Well, some of them are just directional arrows, so then that's another question. I don't know whether a directional arrow actually.
But what if in the directional arrows they say this way to
Lowe's.
XYZ,
right?
And
that's different.
Then it becomes a signage, right? So they are factoring in all of that possibility, so that they don't have to come back to us saying DOB did not consider this to be a not sign.
Right.
So I think they're erring on the
one that I had a concern about, though, is actually the sign is a 7,200 square foot sign. It's really 7,000 square foot sign. I mean, sorry, 700 square foot sign on the side of the Fairway building. And this I actually have experience with. So it's a separate building, arguably, from the Lowe's building. Once you put a sign for another use on a separate building, it becomes an advertising sign. So you're
on
not.
the same zoning lot?
It's not about zoning lot, it's on the building. So the issue is the establishment. The establishment is allowed to have a sign in front of the establishment, right? And I had a lot of experience with this at DOB where my establishment was on the second floor and there was another establishment on the floor below, and the debate about whether we got to be a second establishment because we were on the floor above, because the frontage had already been taken over by the one downstairs. So there was a lot of that, and we've also, remember we had recently I forget what street, but I'm pretty sure it's the Bronx, where they wanted to put a parking directional sign on the corner of the building to tell everybody that there's parking lot down there. And they were saying to us that DOB might give them a problem because the parking sign is on top of like the dry cleaners, right? And so we said, give it a whirl, and if they don't let you, they don't let you, right? So we don't actually know what the outcome of that is. But that's been my experience, that you would not be allowed to have that sign as a accessory sign on the Fairway building. And it's a big sign. So that's the other part of it. And then the next is, are any of the signs illuminated or flashing? I just didn't see if the drawings were clear about that, and if I didn't see them make a distinction between the dimensions and, and the maximums between illuminated and non-illuminated.
It's definitely not flashing.
Not flashing, but still, as long as I was saying it, I wanted to be clear. And then with respect to the as-of-right version with smaller stores, I'd like to understand why the assumption is that the smaller uses will need to compete for loading berths that accept semi-trailers. I would assume that such smaller operations would be more likely to receive smaller scale deliveries by smaller trucks like paddle trucks that can drop off in front of the stores or not use the berths because they don't need to. And the truck area behind the building is really wide. It's like 70 feet wide. So I don't know why there's an assumption that having more stores, that's one of the arguments for the hardship. I don't see that as a believable hardship. This has really, really generous truck traffic circulation. Sort of classic, I guess, 50s planning for shopping centers. Any other?
Financials.
What do you know?
Sorry.
Okay, so I'll just read my major issues. Number one, existing actual leases and proposed Lowe's lease is used in the analysis, and the assumption should be based on comparables and not actual leases, which may reflect negotiating issues specific to the site. Two, all shopping center retail lease comparables are old, ranging from 2013 to 2015. This is 2018. And they are used as a check on the assumptions, so they should be the most recent that could be found. Three, strip mall leases. I'm not convinced that strip mall leases should be used for major shopping mall leases at this site. The starting point of the analysis is too low. Strip malls do not operate like mall stores, and you end up making negative adjustments anyway on those comparables to reflect the obsolescence of the mall. Four, reconciling existing and new leases is problematic. For example, it doesn't make sense that the existing leases with escalation is $39.76 a square foot for existing unrenovated spaces in the as-of-right and the proposed, and then the new space in the as-of-right is much lower on all floors at $31.76 to $38.25. Five, subseller leases in the as-of-right are already discounted for lack of visibility and obsolescence and lack of an anchor tenant, and then on top of that, a 25% vacancy rate is applied. I think that's underestimating the income stream from the seller, especially if it's applied across the board to vacant and occupied space. So if they could just address those issues.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I have some comments and concerns regarding the hardship report from Disco Fitch Architects. They are talking about the reasons, the main reasons for the hardship are lack of visibility of the site from the highway, and I can see that. Topography, understood. Location deep below grades, which is repeated actually. The implication of that is because it's low below grade. Irregularity, signage, and then they are proceeding to the consolidated loading dock area, and I'm not sure what is wrong with the loading dock being consolidated in one area. I believe this could be a privilege, not a hardship. The second thing, they talked about the column grid for the existing building is about 24 by 28. I believe, if I recall, this is very close to what Lowe's uses. However, they are saying that typically it's 40 by 48. I'm not sure if Lowe's is calling for, I tried actually to grab some old drawings in my files to look at them and see what requirements Lowe's use. But I don't think they are 40 by 48. And they are calling for a typical height of 22 feet, and they are saying that the existing is just 60. And they are counting this as a hardship. I'm afraid that this is a self-created hardship because it is the applicant who designed and built that building to these bay sizes and heights. So I'm not sure, but this is one of my concerns. And again, the structural slab thing, they talked about the capacity and they started talking about loadings on the subsoil, on the piles even, and I couldn't see any piles in the drawings. I couldn't see any drawings actually. But when I looked at the cost estimate, I see that for the additional floor area, the additional space they are asking for, they're gonna put 6-inch thick concrete slab on grade. This is like degree 1 of a concrete slab, and they are saying that this is good for Lowe's. So it's gonna take the 300 PSF that they are looking for. If you're gonna put 6-inch slab on grade, so what else do you have in the existing building? Do you have something less than that? Probably 4-inch. Would 4-inch from 6-inch takes you from 75 pound per square foot to 300 pound per square foot? I doubt that. So we need clarification on this. And again, if you have a 4-inch thick slab and you believe that it cannot take the load, wouldn't be this considered as a self-created hardship? You didn't build it to provide.
No,
yeah.
but just to explain, so this is, this part of the argument has to do with the obsolescence of the building. So a building built at a time when nobody could imagine that a shopping center would be used for this kind of warehouse kinds of shopping, which didn't exist in the 1950s. And now, according to the applicant, that's the standard. That's how shopping centers are being used now. And so not being able to predict construction methods, or let's say market needs or changes in market, is not something that's self-created because you can't predict the future. And it was designed to meet the needs of the then shopping mall world, which was a Macy's, right? And now Macy's type places go out of business. We buy all of our shirts online, and the only kinds of things that you actually go to a place for is to drag a tree home in the back of your car, right? Or buy sheetrock so you can do your own thing. So that's why. So okay, so those kind of things. I totally get the idea of a shopping mall being obsolete because, by the way, though there was this big blast of shopping mall construction all over the country and then unfortunately all over the world, now shopping malls are obsolete. Retailers don't want to be in them, and they're trying to figure out what in the world do we do with these things now. They're being converted into all kinds of strange uses, you know. Like there's some in Florida where they have racing tracks for the elderly and stuff. So they become like gyms in these empty shopping malls. It's not like a gym moves in. It's just a place where people can run around and not get hit by a car. So, yeah, some are being converted to housing, some are being converted to amusement parks. It's an interesting phenomenon.
And I think that goes to the comment that you had raised about the height of the building also. It was not designed for this kind of warehouse.
Understood.
Marketing. So I'm not sure whether therefore one can call it a self-created hardship.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
No,
So
it's obsolescence.
That's what
It's obsolescence.
I just want to
And so, and to
use-specific
put
bill to-
to put in perspective, who knows what EJ Corvettes is? That was how the building was built. It was built to be the home of.
I know what EJ Corvette
I know you do.
No idea.
There you go. So most people don't.
Aging ourselves.
So lots, it's like gimbals.
My dad was a manager in Gimbals.
Yeah,
I know
see?
Gimbals too.
Okay.
Okay, so I just need, if they are submitting cost estimates, so we just need to get some more details like usual. Quantity surveys, we don't want to just get the numbers, 300 cubic yards, 50,000 square foot. We need to get the background behind these numbers. So please give us the documents and the details of these quantity surveys.
Okay. Great. Okay, thanks.
Fire department. We have a letter
See the letter?
from fire department? Series of violations of non-compliance with the fire
And they-
standpipes and all of that.
The applicant responded saying that they retained a specialist who will go about resolving the violations.
We should address that tomorrow.
Yeah, they should.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Ready? Item number 7, 2017-308BZ, 50 East 69th Street, Manhattan.
Okay. So we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval with 30 in favor, 8 against, and 2 abstaining. We have 1 letter in support, and we do need the certificate of appropriateness from Landmarks Commission. We can't go by a comment that the staff thinks this is a nice idea. This is like one of these pet peeves of mine, this phenomenon of an applicant, of a property owner having to come to the BSA because a building was built in the 19th century or early 20th century for residential use, gets sold and converted to another use, and in a lot of cases, they did nothing to the building at all except move in, right? And then they move out, and a person wants to use it for residential, and they have to come to the BSA to get a variance. So I think it's ridiculous that that happens. So just saying, it's one of those real unfortunate things that should be changed in the zoning resolution. In this case, there was a rear yard incursion built as part of the community facility and a penthouse built as part of the community facility. So that's something that arguably wouldn't have been something you could convert as of right. Should have been able to convert it as of right. So I only had 2 questions because I don't have any issues with the fact that they unfortunately have to come here for a variance. That they should clarify that the portion of the building located in the R8B complies with the adjusted maximum floor area requirements of section 77-22, because the zoning calculations don't review the lot at all as subdivided or applying the adjusted maximum FAR. It just blends. It just takes the floor area of one side and the floor area of the other side and adds it together, which is not how it's done. They need to clarify on the plans which are the new exterior walls to be constructed and the existing walls to be removed and the existing walls to remain. The reason that I just needed to understand that they're not building anything in the R8B area that would require a further waiver. I think they said that they're not, but I don't see that clearly explained on the drawings. And those were my only questions.
I just had a very simple question. I mean, again, not knowing I wasn't clear on the floor area calculation, so that's why I have this question, which is the proposed floor area that is being indicated after all the elimination of the bulk from the first floor is still more than the existing. And that's why I want to know, and that is even counting that addition that is being made to the penthouse. It is significantly more than.
But that's because they still must count the floor area that they're retaining because of the walls of that extension. Because though they're taking out the guts of it and removing the roof, it's still floor area. Because it's enclosed on 3 sides by a wall.
I see.
So, which I thought was great that they picked up, because that would have been my first comment, sorry, that's floor area. So, so they're being super careful, as they should.
Okay. All right, okay, then that was just my comment.
No comments.
No comment? Okay, good. Commissioner Shetta?
No, I have
Comments?
no comment.
This concludes the public review session for April 9th, 2018.